Hi there, Dave here, and I wanted to give an acknowledgement before this episode about Pathologic 2 begins. Between the time of recording this episode and the release day, some new allegations of criminal and predatory behavior about Nikolay Dybowski were made. Dybowski is credited as the founder of Icepick Lodge and is credited as the director and lead writer on Pathologic 2, though now his involvement in the game is also under scrutiny. Prior to recording the episode, there were other allegations that had been made about his behavior, but we did not bring them up in the episode because I personally did not feel rooted enough in facts, as these allegations still basically live on the Pathologic subreddit, as they all come from Russian police filings, Russian text conversations that are translated by Reddit community members. So I did not make them into a talking point in the episode because I did not want to talk about something that I barely knew about. These new allegations kind of give the sense that there's too much smoke to not be fire, and so I wanted to once again remind everyone that endorsement of somebody's work, endorsement of somebody's art, and especially with this game, because we're going to spend the next 3 hours heaping all kinds of praise on this game, are not an endorsement of Dybowski as a person, or really anybody else who worked on the game. We're just talking about the game. We did also want to acknowledge the hundreds of other people that are credited on Pathologic 2 and their work that should be praised. So thank you and enjoy the show. Hello, everybody. My name is Dave Jackson, and you're listening to Tales from the Backlog. This is a video games deep dive review podcast where each week I'm joined by a guest to bring a game out of the backlog, play it, and discuss. My guest today is a friend of the show, community member, and dumpster diving enthusiast, Jack. Welcome to the show, Jack.
Hello. Thank you for having me. A pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. I think that we have a wonderful discussion ahead of us about today's game. And thank you at the top of the show, just to thank you for kind of shepherding me a little bit as we went through this game.
No, that's fine. I just hope I didn't seem overbearing, giving too much advice.
I don't think too much advice really exists for today's game. Today's game is Pathologic 2. Which is a survival game developed by Icepick Lodge and published by Tiny Build for PC, PS4, and Xbox One in 2019. And at the top of the show, we'll just mention Pathologic 2 exists somewhere in the space between a remake, a reimagining, and a remaster of the original Pathologic, which released in 2005. Couple of credits for the top of the show here for Pathologic 2. It was directed by Nikolay Dybowski and produced by Alex Nichiporchik and Ivan Slavtsov. And so new mispronunciations for a new country of origin on the podcast here. So apologies for names. As always, I'm doing me best. Why did I say me? What am I doing here? If this is your first time listening to the show, thank you for stopping by. Here is how spoilers work on the episode. We're not going to spoil the story of Pathologic 2 for a while. And also, this game has a lot of emergent situations that come up just by the nature of the gameplay and the situations you find yourself in. We're going to talk a little bit about that stuff, but we're not going to spoil specific situations we found ourselves in, because I think that is part of the joy of this game. Joy in quotation marks is these situations and how you get yourself through them. So we're not going to spoil those things either. So check down in the show notes for a timestamp for when the spoilers actually do begin for Pathologic 2. And until then, you can listen worry-free. So what is Pathologic 2? We have some elevator pitches for the top of the show here. My pitch for Pathologic 2 is, have you ever thought that resource and meter-based survival games were too friendly and too easy? Well, Pathologic 2 might be the game for you. Jack, what's the pitch for you?
It's along similar lines. I say, would you like to be stressed for 25 hours, but then at the end of it, look back and say, it was pretty fun.
Yep.
And I know that I'm dropping the F word quite soon there, but we'll get into it. But I think this game, it is fun, which might surprise some people.
Certainly engaging and compelling and all of those things for sure. And depending on what your definition of fun is, there is fun to be had in this game, despite all the stress for sure. And you said 25 hours. That matches up with my playtime pretty well. It took me 27 hours to beat it. I played it on Steam. I have heard that the console versions aren't the best, although maybe with newer gen consoles, they might be performing a little bit better. You played this on PC also, right?
Yes, I have heard similar things about the console version, especially the PS4 version. It sounds like that was really not in a good state. Although I think it might be better playing on current gen stuff now, but yeah.
Right on. Well, we always get the show kicked off with our personal histories with Pathologic and Pathologic 2 in particular for today's episode. So we always start with the guest. Jack, tell me, how did you get into this game in the first place? Because you were one of the people who, before I started playing this, I knew that you like this. You talk about it a lot in the spaces online that we share. So what brought you to Pathologic?
Yeah, I'd say I've got a fairly long history with this in that I did start with Pathologic 1. I found that not long after I got into PC gaming in like 2015, 2016, moving to PC, I was just impressed at the ridiculous number of games you could find going through like a Steam sale. And so going through there, I just saw, this game is on sale for £1. It would be rude not to look at it. And then as I was going down the store page, it was like, this is a tough survival game. I was like, that sounds interesting. It's open world and narrative driven. That's interesting. And we really believe in storytelling and the power of stress. I was like, okay, now you've got my attention. So I tried it out, but I didn't last very long. But I did read lots of stuff about it online and got a feel of what the reputation was. But I didn't really get properly into it until Pathologic 2 came out. And I played it. I mean, I spent a little bit of time in 1, but 2 is the first one I really played properly. And then I've since gone back.
So when Pathologic 2 came out, was that like a day one or like a close to a day one buy for you then?
I don't remember exactly when it came out. I definitely played it within like a few months of it coming out. Yeah, it was something that I was looking forward to for a while.
Right on. Cool. For me personally, I had never heard of this series and I didn't come across it naturally. It's kind of cool. Like, I feel like I never just come across games on the Steam store. I always go there with intent. So I had never heard of this until I heard it covered on Watch Out for Fireballs, where they described it as the absolute best game that nobody should play. And I don't have like a super rebellious streak in me, but with games, when people say like, this is really good, you shouldn't play it though, that's kind of like a challenge to me a little bit. So it basically cinched that I would, in fact, play it. I didn't play Pathologic 1, though. When I was getting ready to start one of these, do it on the podcast, I kind of gathered some opinions. I probably asked you, like, what should I play? Should I play the first game or play the second game? And the pretty overwhelming opinion is, like, the second game is just a better game, and it contains a lot. It may be like the thematic stuff might be a little bit different, but like the essence of Pathologic is basically the same in both of them. It's just a much better play experience. So I went with Pathologic 2. I own the first game. Like you said, it's real cheap all the time. So I have it. I'm still open to trying it, but
yeah, I think the first game, the reputation of the best game you shouldn't play holds a lot better. Yeah. I still think it's very worth playing, but it's much less approachable and more tedious.
Yeah, for sure. And the second game I found to be just a really complex game. So there's a lot of stuff that like I finished playing Pathologic 2 like just like a tangled web of thoughts, basically. So I've attempted to like untangle them a little bit. First of all, I think this game is absolutely brilliant. I don't know. It would probably be in like a top 25, top 50 games that I've ever played. I love this game. At the same time, it is easily one of the most difficult games I've ever played, and the difficulty is going to put a lot of people off. There are difficulty options in the game added after release, but there are difficulty options now. But the standard recommended difficulty is very fucking difficult. So I found this to be a very stressful and very desperate experience for a lot of my playtime. But during that time, I couldn't stop playing it. I was like so compelled by the mechanical systems, by the storytelling, by what was coming on the next day. I couldn't put this game down. So like I'm coming out of this experience putting this game firmly in that category of like super unique, super idiosyncratic, qualified recommendations like Rain World and God Hand and stuff like that, that I'll never shut up about this game. For the rest of my time talking about games, I will talk about Pathologic 2 with like, I don't know, like this reverence. I'm amazed by everything that went into this. And it's like, I can't recommend it to everybody, but for a lot of people that value mechanical systems that reinforce the story and story that reinforces mechanical systems and things like that, this is incredible. I love this game.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that we've got similar thoughts. Yeah, especially what you say about like you'll never shut up about this game.
Yep.
You know, I've played this back in 2019. And I feel like since then, I've basically made it a part of my personality. Mm-hmm. I feel like when I'm thinking about games just generally or talking about games with people, this will often just come to mind as an example of, oh, this does that thing we're talking about really well, or that's a really interesting solution. Yeah, it's just a very impressive game that it makes a lot of choices that you don't see in many games, but that surprisingly work very well. That I'm sure we'll get into as we discuss the mechanics later. And yeah, it just sucks you in. It's just the mechanics involves you so completely that, you know, I often find I'm playing it for like 3 hours minimum at a time. It's just difficult to take yourself away from.
And it's interesting that happens too. And like, I'm sure we'll expand on this later, but like just at the top, I would often play this for 2-3 hours in a row also, and I would be like stressed to the maximum the entire time I was playing it. But I'll play other stressful games like Resident Evil 4 is a stressful game, and I'll play that for like 30 minutes to an hour at a time and then put it down and pick it back up the next day. You know, like some games you're stressed and you get to the end of a chapter or something like that. And you're like, whew, thank God, I'm turning this off. I'll pick it back up tomorrow. And Pathologic, I'd get to the day and it'd be like, I can't turn it off. I got shit to do. I have so much I need to do. So I can't stop playing. And despite the fact that I'm like so stressed and like probably needed a break from time to time, but it does suck you into that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a sort of game where like I'll just be playing and then like someone will come into my room and we'll be standing there for 5 minutes and I won't notice, and then I'll touch my arm and I'll suddenly be like, oh, what are you doing there? Because I'm just so absorbed. I think that's interesting what you say about like with other games you'd come off at the end of a stage or something. Like one of the reasons I think this game is so compelling is that there aren't really clear stopping points, because, you know, this is getting a bit ahead into mechanical talk, I guess, but you know, the whole thing is running in real time. There's a clock running, and so there's just no clean break when you can say, okay, I'm done, I can step away and start something new. You're always thinking ahead about, okay, well, what's my plan for the next few hours, and how will that tie in for the overall day and all of that.
Exactly. Yeah. So we do have a lot of stuff to cover. So let's put a pin in talking about that that day cycle and, you know, making plans and things like that. We'll listen to a bit of music from Pathologic 2, and when we come back, we will set up the story. Pathologic 2 takes place in a small, unnamed town on the steppe. That's Steppe, the steppe. The setting is this really interesting fusion of this ancient steppe culture with all the traditions and superstitions and rituals and mysticism and all of that, mixed with this, it seems like early 20th century type buildings, this kind of old style technology around, so maybe, I don't know, mid 20th century. I'm real bad with stuff like that.
No, I think it's deliberately ambiguous too.
Yeah, that's fair. There is clear technology like a gramophone or like old guns and stuff like that. But then there's also impossible technology also that you can't place it because it's not like physically possible to do. But anyway, there's a lot of stuff in this setting. So I just wanted to say at the top, this is really dense. This is really every character has an important role in the town. The characters' histories are all intertwined. The juxtaposition of this old steppe culture with this, modern, quote, progress that's going on in town. It's really rich, and we're not going to be able to cover everything in this podcast. Truthfully, I don't understand all of it. There is a lot in here. So I came out of this with an intense respect for the world building. And that's even before we talk about all the wild story presentation things that go into this game. The world building is incredible.
Yeah, there's really, there's just not a lot like it. And it just throws you right in. Yeah, there's no codex to explain what's going on.
Yeah, it's a lot. But you'll spend a lot of time in here. You'll talk to all these people. You'll have a chance to learn about their histories and kind of your place in all of this. And you're put in kind of an interesting place. So your protagonist character in Pathologic 2 is Artemy Barak, who is known as the Haruspex, who is one of the 3 playable characters in the first Pathologic game. So when we say it's kind of a remake, it's kind of a remake. You're playing as one of the characters from the original game. Your character Artemy was born and raised on the steppe, and so is from this culture, but has been away for many years studying medicine in the big city. So you are summoned back to your hometown by your father, Isidore, who is the town physician. And this letter from your dad says, great difficulties are coming, very cryptic, bad shit is on the horizon. So you got to go back home. And then going back home, you find that your father was murdered. So when we talk about this setting having this really rich world building of these kind of almost seemingly incompatible cultures, they represent 2 different types of philosophy and culture and, ideals and things like that. Your character is halfway between them. So your character is from this steppe culture, but you've been gone for a really long time. You've been out in the big cities. So you've been, surrounded by this more modern culture, and then you go back home. And that's one of the themes that this game works with is homecoming. And can you reintegrate? Are you interested in reintegrating, or are you more on the side of the modern people, we'll say? I think that this setup and kind of putting you in the middle of this makes the Haruspex a really perfect character, I think, of the 3 original ones to give you the best of both worlds, so to speak.
Yeah, it's interesting starting with the Haruspex. I think he's a very interesting character, and they pull it off how you play him really well. But I think it's interesting to compare it with Pathologic 1, where in that game, the introductory character was the Bachelor, who was this outsider coming to town who, understood about as much of it as you do. He's as surprised by everything as you are.
Mm-hmm.
And when they announced that they were going to focus Pathologic 2 around the Haruspex first, there was some surprise, but I think it works because, as you say, he's coming back after a long time, and so he sort of has to reintegrate himself.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's also, because Artemy is from here, there's a way where it does exposition in a clever way, I think, where you sort of absorb knowledge that Artemis assumed to already have through like dialogue options and his thoughts, which we'll talk about later, but you have access to those. And so I think it does a really good job of grounding you in this place and in these concepts that would probably be very overwhelming otherwise.
It's still a bit overwhelming. I think like this is a game that has just a million proper nouns and, you know, words in other languages, and sometimes characters will just speak to you in this step language, and there's no attempt made to help you understand what they're saying. Like, you're either going to pick up a few words here and there as you play, or you're not, and the game's not going to give you like a translator or something, or Artemis not going to play the game and, you know, think to you, oh, I remember what this word means. Here's what it means. No, like sometimes you'll have like dialogue options that are all in this step language, and you're like, well, I hope I picked the right one.
You just have to guess from context.
Yeah. So you do, like, a lot of games will try and throw you into these really complex worlds as the outsider type character, and try to build that synergy where you know as much as the character knows. And in Pathologic 2, everyone assumes that you know what's up, but Artemis still kind of like pulled between both of these worlds. And I think that it's like, it could have been a disaster, but I think it works in here. So like, they assume that you know stuff. You might not, but if you don't, it's not a disaster, and you'll pick stuff up. But the key part of this is that when you return to town, everybody knows you. And so some people expect things from you. And that's where some of like your quests and things begin, like trying to figure out who killed your father, if that's a lead that you want to pursue.
Or, you know, you might choose that you just don't care about all that.
Yeah, you could choose that. There's a lot of stuff that's going on. So we'll set up a couple of the other plot lines. In addition to your father being murdered, when Artemis gets back to the train station, he gets jumped by 3 muggers. There's like a flash forward sequence, and then those muggers are all dead. So everybody is calling you a murderer and hates your guts at the beginning of the game. Also, there is a plague that will, it's not there right at the begin. Well, that's a lie. It's there right at the beginning, but it's not there for the first couple days of play. But there's a plague coming, and Artemis is a doctor. So part of the game too is that you can try to save the town, save the people, save yourself, try to figure out, you know, a cure for the plague and things like that. So you have a lot of plates to spin, and that is one of the names of the game in Pathologic 2 is spinning plates and following the leads that you're most interested in, or sometimes maybe not the ones you're most interested in, but just the ones that you think you can actually accomplish, because they're not the same thing in this game.
Yeah, just go to whichever map marker is closest.
Yeah. Yeah. So Artemis has these 4 things going on at the beginning of the game. Your father's been murdered. You can investigate that. There's a plague, so you got to try to keep people healthy, keep yourself healthy. You need to clear your name, and you need to reintegrate into the town and possibly reintegrate with the steppe culture. So one of the cool parts about this game is that all of these things are optional. You don't have to cure the plague. You don't have to find your father's murderer. You don't have to integrate with anybody. You don't have to do anything, really. The win condition of this game is to survive long enough to see the ending. It's not, you know, you have this big main quest, and once you finish it, the game's over. The game is almost indifferent to whether you do anything at all other than survive. And I think that that's really confident, and it leads to a lot of people having their playthrough feel very unique. And that's a lot of what our spoiler section today is going to be like, is us talking about our experiences, just kind of like journal style. And it's going to be really different. And I think it's super cool.
Yeah, it's really, they really focused on making it this non-linear experience, because like in a lot of ways this is very similar to Pathologic 1, but one way that they really changed it was increasing the non-linearity and just letting you pick and choose what you are going to engage with and which tasks you're going to prioritize. And yeah, I think it is confident, like you say, to leave aspects, have so much of the game be technically optional, but they have this confidence that, while you're playing the game, you want to see bits of content. So you are going to go talk to people and see things because that's what you're here for. But it just makes it feel that much more engaging that, you have agency even in pursuing these basic, aspects of the story, which other games wouldn't necessarily give you. And I think that adds a lot to this whole inhabiting the character. You really will feel like you are in Artemis' shoes for this, which is one of the game's best strengths, I think.
Yeah, and speaking of inhabiting the character, that brings us to one of the most unique features of Pathologic 2, which is how this story is presented to you. So the story is, there's a meta element to it, and there's a meta element in the way that it does kind of reference Pathologic 1. The game actually begins at the end of a failed playthrough where the plague has taken over the town, and you get like this really, really cool like tour through the streets that are just devastated. They're on fire. There's soldiers everywhere. They're like executing people in the street. You get to the end, you're playing as Artemis, and you talk to the people who are in charge of the, fight the plague effort. And they're basically like, no, this town is fucked. It's got to be destroyed. We got to save the rest of the place. And you talk to this other character named Mark Immortel, who is a theater director. That's his role in the game. And he basically offers you another chance. You accept it, and then the game kind of resets you back to day 0, and you start your playthrough. And the whole game is played out as if it is a theater production. They called it epic theater, where the player controls an actor who is playing the part of Artemis Barak, which is much different from the way that most, games do things. And so this theatrical presentation adds like one layer of weirdness to everything. So it's not weird enough that you have like this plague and all these really interesting NPCs around and this, all this rich world building and stuff like that. You have stagehands that are around the character. You have very prominent stage lighting in a lot of scenes. You have this theater director character that you talk with whenever you die or in key parts in the story. So on top of having a dense world that they've built, then we have another layer of like interesting presentation with this theater aspect to it, which is like really cool and leads to a lot. I'll give you a chance to comment just on this before I go too far.
No, yeah, it's I really like how they do it. The way they, like, there'll be bits in the game, like you say, with the lighting where they'll specifically like put a spotlight on something that's really important. And, there'll be these moments where you're chatting to, these stagehands with their Shy Guy masks.
Yeah.
And they actually do something funny where some of the stagehands are like these dressed in these plague doctor bird costumes.
Yeah.
Which, for one thing, they just look incredible. I love the way it is. But then they do a bit of a trick with that where, there are these meta guys who are wearing those, who are like representing these forces who can't just be characters. But then there are also just characters in the game who are wearing those costumes for protection, and you're never quite sure which one you're going to end up talking to.
Yeah. You're just kind of like constantly thrown off by this presentation. And I think one of the parts of it too is that because you are playing a theater production, characters don't really talk like real people a lot of the time. They talk like stage performers. So they have like these really, flowery or like metaphor rich text. So like you talk to someone and you might be like, wow, that was really interesting and like super well written, but I don't really know what the fuck that person just said. Like that happened to me many times playing this. So it's all part of this presentation, which I think is, excellent. The writing and the conversations is really, really good.
It's actually really interesting because compared to the first game, a lot of the dialogue actually feels very grounded and naturalistic. In the first game, it's like, people speak like they're out of a 19th century novel or something.
Mm-hmm.
And then in this game, it's still, people speak in metaphors and images and, hardly the kind of talk you'd hear just from people on the street. But I guess just coming from Pathologic 1, it feels much more believable in comparison. Like, oh, this is sort of something someone might say.
Yeah, I definitely would like finish conversations. Like a lot of the time I would come out of it with like an idea of what this character is about, what they want, things like that. But they definitely still are like the conversations kind of like elevated above the way real people talk to each other.
Yeah, definitely.
For sure. Even when you're talking to like little kids or like Artemis' friends from when he was a kid or something like that.
Yeah, the most articulate children in games, maybe.
Yeah, that's 100% true. Yeah. Wanted to shout out the writing credits. Again, Nikolay Dybowski and Alexandra Golubeva. The writing is just fantastic across the board in here. So like to the level of item descriptions are very evocative and cool and fun to read. Conversations are really fun to, I legitimately want to talk to people in Pathologic, even if they're not the most important players in the plot. And then just like the writing of the story at large and like within this theatrical presentation, this game is rich with thematic content as well. Again, it's one of those games that like we're going to talk about some interpretations of the themes and things like that in the spoiler section. And we have a big list of things to just, say, this is what I think this game is commenting on and things like that. But this is the type of game that like no one podcast or YouTube essay or something will ever cover every thematic element of Pathologic 2. There's too much. And it's like, it's super impressive that there's so much here and that it doesn't feel like there's like too much, like the game doesn't feel confused to me, but it's just rich. It's full of this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it is like a piece of literature, It can support dozens of essays and, I've definitely read quite a few. It's just one of those things that can be talked about a lot, and there's a lot to say about it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and a lot that it seems to be saying, consciously or not.
Yeah, so some of those themes that we just wanted to like touch on at the top of the show as like a little tease for maybe here's something to expect in Pathologic 2. I came out of this again with the theme of homecoming, with Artemis returning home and possibly reintegrating the disease and the way the government, the army responds to the disease and how people problem solve within this. How you problem solve as the protagonist in a video game who wants to be a good person when faced with the realities of what's going on in the town. There is, I think, an environmentalist lean and kind of how humans have a relationship with the earth. That's a big part of the steppe cultures, the relationship with the earth. And then a large chunk of an individualism versus collectivism type of theme as you go as well. And you had some too that you wrote down that I didn't even think of.
Yeah, I mean, there's a big part of the game, I don't think it's really a spoiler to say that it deals with colonialism to a large degree. The town is a colonialist town, this was a place where the indigenous steppe people have been living for, I think they say thousands of years. There have been people living there. And then these white settlers from like, they don't say it's in Russia, but it is probably in Russia. So these white settlers from like further west have come and built this modern town. I will say that for as much as we've been heaping praise on the game so far, and will continue to do so, some of the ways it handles this are maybe not as sensitive as you'd hope. I mean, we can get into it. There are different ways of interpreting it.
Yeah.
But there has been a lot written about how this game engages with colonialism in ways that I think are quite interesting. But then, there's a lot more to talk about. Artemy, it's a story of his coming of age in a lot of ways, coming to find his place in this community.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of, children learning to grow up themselves, that a lot of whom you're responsible for.
Yeah.
And then all like the meta elements, how it handles death, how it handles the player as their own person. You could just keep going.
Yeah, there's so much here. And it's, I watched like 3 or 4 YouTube essays in the past couple days getting ready for this episode, just trying to absorb all the different takes that people have had out there about this. And there's a lot. I mean, there's a lot of stuff where I come into this with my ideas that I strongly connected with when I played the game. And then I watch other people's interpretations. And when we get to the spoiler section, we'll hear yours. And there's just so much that this is a game that bears repeated playthroughs for sure. But at the very least, this is a game where you want to play it and then hear other people's interpretations. Because there are things that are really clear themes that are really clear in here. But a lot of the ways that the game explores them is through this shroud of mystery and epic theater presentation and things like that just make them a little bit more open to interpretation, I feel like.
Yeah, it's one of those things that, like a good book or something, it rewards going back to it at different points in your life and seeing something new. This is one of those games that I will often just look for new streamers playing it or something just to see what they think as they're playing, and I'll often notice something as I'm watching again and just, seeing things with fresh eyes.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's just so much to notice. And, that's not even just because of how much of it is missable.
Yeah, I did stream a lot of this playthrough, and this is probably the game that's had the most people like you said, who are looking for someone playing Pathologic 2 for the first time to watch on Twitch. And I had at least a handful of people that joined and were just like, I just need to watch somebody play this for the first time. It's always interesting watching people and how they handle all this shit. So
yeah,
it is one of those. Let's take a little music break and come back and talk about the presentation, graphics, music, sound, and things like that. So let's talk about the way Pathologic 2 looks. First of all, I think this game looks really, really good. It has a somewhat realistic type of presentation, but it is there's a very strong art direction behind it. So as you're kind of walking through the streets, I don't think that the streets themselves of Pathologic 2 look all that distinct, we'll say, from, another type of game with this type of European-ish town setting or something like that. But literally every other visual presentation element makes this game instantly recognizable if you see them, down to the way the NPCs look, down to maybe if you see those stagehands around. Anytime the theater type presentation gets brought in. So like we said, the spotlights or the kind of the extras or the if you actually go into the theater itself and see so we have a theater production, but there's a theater in town, stuff like that. You can go watch a stage play within the stage play. Whenever you get into literally anything besides what do the streets and buildings look like, I think that this has just super strong art direction.
Yeah, the architecture's really interesting, I think. like in particular, there are these two massive structures on each side of the town, which are very distinctive, and which you can
that's
see
the exception to what I said about, like, the houses may look like regular houses, but they're these mega structures too.
Yeah, and they're obviously very distinctive, and you can see them from almost anywhere on the map. But then, like the other buildings as well, there's just like the buildings where important NPCs live usually have like distinctive designs, and not just the exterior. But one thing that I really like is how the interiors of these houses look. You can go into these buildings and talk to these NPCs, and the houses are always built, like a stage or something, where the whole thing is designed to convey something about their character and how they live. The visuals and music inside people's homes is very deliberately chosen, I think, and it works really well. And then the character designs themselves, like they're not the most realistic looking people, but the way that they're framed and lit and animated when you talk to them really sells it, and conveys a lot of character again, like they're in the spotlight on a stage and they're having their moment while you talk to them. And another thing is just when it comes down to like what people look like, I find it really interesting how this game even just does like a family resemblance. Like there are these important families in the game, and as you meet people, you can tell that they're related just from their faces, and like in ways that even I think inform their characterization in a few cases. That it's just really, you can tell that everyone who was working on the art was completely in touch with the writing and the design, and it all comes together very well, I think.
Yeah, agreed. One of the big striking things presentation-wise is the way your conversations are like framed. This is really interesting. I don't think I've ever played another game that does it to this degree. So you spend a lot of this game talking to people, and the way it is presented is it's super zoomed in on the character's face. A lot of games will show you, a camera of like their upper body, at least. This one is just like, I don't even know if you see people's shoulders in this game. Like, it's super zoomed in. It's in like this black void, and it is like
you're taken to the conversation realm.
Yeah. And there's a spotlight on the characters, and sometimes if there's multiple characters, one character will be more well lit than the other, and I think those are deliberate choices that are made on how to light characters. When you get up in close, like with their faces, you see, the details really. So the facial animations are very subtle in a lot of cases, but you can definitely tell how people are feeling because you're so close and you can see those things. You can like see the bags under people's eyes, or if, let's say they have scars or they're dirty or something like that. You can see all of that at that close level of detail. So it's something you can tell. They really spent a lot of time making these characters look memorable when you go up and talk to them. And like you said, they don't look like real people, really. They look like pathologic characters. And so you could give me a character face model, a character face from this game outside of the context of this game, and I would be like, that looks like a pathologic character right there. And I think it gives this game like a really strong identity, because you do spend so much time talking to these people. And that's not even mentioning the characters that are not people in this game.
Yeah, they're maybe not as expressive, but they look good.
Yeah.
Yeah, while we're still talking about the conversations, is they have all these little like micro expressions that they make as you're talking to them. And like it should be said that they're not like responding to what you say, like they're just sort of on a animation cycle. But it does convey like the type of moods or characters that they have. Like one character that I always go to, there's character called Capella, who like starts off very friendly with you, and, is very welcoming, but she can sometimes get this very stern look on her face, which sort of foreshadows where her character can sometimes go later, I think. There's just lots of, their faces tell you what's going under the surface, like a good actor would, I suppose.
Yeah.
To keep using that metaphor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The voice acting also does a little bit of that job too, to give you a little bit of characterization. And this game handles voice acting really in a really interesting way. So it's not fully voice acted. And so what a lot of games will do in this situation is they'll have the character say the first line of like a big, speech thought or whatever, or they'll have them say a couple words, or they'll have them say nothing, right? But it's always like related to the text that's on the screen. I'm playing Metaphor ReFantasio right now, and it does that, where like, if it's not a fully voice acted scene, the character will say the first sentence of their thought. Pathologic 2 does something different, where when you initiate conversation with a character that's voice acted, they will give a line of dialogue that's completely unrelated to what they say in the conversation you're having. And it's usually very like theatrical.
That's one word for it.
Yeah, very odd in a lot of cases. And I wonder, so I didn't pick up on a lot of these because I had a hard time listening to words that this character is saying and reading completely different words that are on the screen. So I would get very, my brain would get confused by that. So I think that what that is just trying to give you a feeling of what this character sounds like and maybe the mood that they're in or something like that. But I couldn't tell you if the words that they're actually speaking have significance, although my guess is probably they do.
Yeah, they do usually. Sometimes they're just sort of random things that the character might say, like a nursery rhyme or something.
Yeah.
But sometimes there must be like some sort of time sensitive aspect or like flagging, because sometimes they'll say a line that's very directly related to like what's happened that day, and I'll be surprised, like, oh, you're not usually that coherent. But yeah, it definitely helps just give these characters a voice. Actually, this time, this is my second time doing a full replay of the game. And this time I played with the Russian voices for the first, which it didn't change too much because, like you say, there's quite minimal voice acting really. But it's just another way of getting an idea of how these people were meant to be, characterized, how they're meant to come across to you, I guess.
Always interesting when you play a game that has such rich dialogue and like metaphor and things like that, and then like this isn't the native language. So props to whoever localized this, because this is a Russian studio. So like I've heard the Russian voice acting, it sounds good to me. The English voice acting is really good as well. And, the localization I think was also great to give us just this like rich game world to learn about and these awesome conversations and things like that.
Yeah, definitely. I do not envy the translators of this game. I think I saw, while I was reading some interview, that, it's like a 250,000 word game. So, like a full novel, basically.
Yep. A lot of stuff for sure. Music in Pathologic 2 is pretty understated, is the word I landed on for this in a lot of cases. The two credits for the soundtrack are Vasily Kashnikov and Theodor Bastard. A lot of the music is there for like tone and atmosphere in the background rather than, a hummable melody or something like that. But the game does pick its spots to give you these like grand sounding songs. Like in the opening section when you're walking through the streets that are on fire and people are dead in the street and stuff like that, there's a very powerful song playing during that scene. But most of this game, so I finished the game and I wrote my outline and I was like, there's no music most of the time. And that's not true. There is music most of the time. It's just way, way back. And it might just be like a couple of chords every now and then, or atmospheric sound.
Yeah, I was surprised when I saw you write that, because I was like, the OST to this game is like 3 hours long.
Yeah, there's a lot of music. It's just not very prominent most of the time.
Yeah, I should say that so Vasily is I think he's like a part of Ice Pick Lodge, he's an in-house composer. And Theodor Bastard are a band that they got in.
Yeah.
And this isn't a clean divide, but usually it's that Vasily's stuff is like background ambience, like as you're walking around or talking to people. And then usually they'll use Theodor Bastard for some sort of, one of those big scenes where they want the music to take center stage, that's when they'll bring them in, and it'll, be very good. They're very good when it comes in. The music is it's sort of one of the more controversial aspects, I think, like in the community, because Pathologic 1 has a very distinctive soundtrack. That's
oh yeah. I heard it in a video described as like Half-Life 2 from the step.
Yeah. It's I've heard a few colorful ways of describing it. I think I quite like step trip hop. It's like this weird mix of, electronic synths and drums and weird chanting that weirdly works. And so obviously that's a lot more distinctive as you're walking around than Pathologic 2's. I do think Pathologic 2 still works. Like, I think walking around in Pathologic 2 is so active. You've got so much you're focusing on while you're walking around that having this music in the background that sort of blurs the line between soundtrack and sort of just ambience. But I think it sort of works to just sort of keep you in the moment and keep the tension up. I think if Pathologic 1's music was playing while I was playing this, I'd probably get really distracted.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it works, but it's not necessarily all listenable.
Yeah, it definitely works, and it kind of combines with other sound design to give this game just a really stressful is the word that I'll land on. A really stressful kind of atmosphere as you're going around town, and weird too. So like you'll hear as you're going around town, you will hear things that you might expect from a game like this, right? So there are sick people, you'll hear people coughing, you'll hear people screaming in the distance. Especially like I talked to at least one person who said that was too much when they played the intro and it was just people screaming all over the place. And, if you go into an infected zone, you'll hear people screaming, people coughing, people fighting. You will hear this like kind of overwhelming, like buzzing, moaning sound in all the infected zones. It's just, that's what the zone sounds like.
Yeah, this like deep throat singing.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's that stuff. And then you'll hear, glass breaking, cats, dogs, stuff like that in the background. But you'll also hear like weird stuff. Like you'll hear bulls, making bull sounds. There's no bull around you, but you'll hear it. Oftentimes you'll be walking through and you'll hear like this belching sound coming from the earth. And the game teaches you that there's something you're supposed to do when you hear that sound. And this is a normal thing that's supposed to be happening here. So it's just, we have this kind of stress-inducing sound design. And then you have this weird sound design that just lends this extra strange quality to the atmosphere as you're going through. And I think all of it's like really, really effective. But it is just another notch in the this is a weird game belt.
Yeah, while we're on the topic of stressful sound design, the sound that herbs make specifically, there's like you can pick herbs in this game.
The insect buzzing, yeah.
Yeah, there's a sound cue when you get close to them where it's like the sound of a fly in your ear, and it's just it really gets on your nerves. Mm-hmm. You can't miss it, so it's helpful from a gameplay perspective, but it's like, I don't like it.
Yeah. Whew, all right, well, we're getting into gameplay, so let's listen to a bit of the music from Pathologic 2, and then it's time to talk about what it's like to actually play this game. In Pathologic 2, we said at the top, this is a survival game, and survival is the name of the game. At the beginning, you choose your difficulty. The hardest difficulty is the default and the recommended one. The developers really, really want you to at least try it on the highest difficulty, the standard one. And I think this is one thing that's going to put a lot of people off. This is one thing that hurt this game when people were reviewing it at the time of its release, is the difficulty. It is a punishing game. There's no beating around the bush. It is a hard game, but I think that in order for some of the game's thematic material to hit, you need to play this on a difficulty that feels stressful and desperate.
Yeah, absolutely. It's I think the tooltip when you go to the difficulty screen is Pathologic 2 is intended to be almost unbearable.
Yeah.
Which I think sums it up very nicely.
There was an interview I saw a clip from with the developers where somebody asked them, after they had added the difficulty selector, because they put a bunch of sliders in where you can really customize the difficulty down to which meter increases at which speed. And one thing they added in is the ability to make the game harder than the standard super difficult difficulty. And the developers were giddy at the idea of people making this game harder than the intended difficulty. So I think that says a lot.
Yeah. And there are people who do challenge runs of this with the sliders cranked up, and and they have to play a completely different way. I think a lot of those runs don't do much story and focus on robbing people and where can they get the best organs and
yep.
all of that. But yeah, to go back to difficulty. Although when the game launched, it wasn't just the sliders. There were no difficulty options at all. It was just, this is how you play. And then, the reviews they got complained a lot about that. So they added in these options. And I do think, now that those are added, I think this is probably one of the, best versions of difficulty sliders I can think of. Mm-hmm. Just in the sense that they're very clear about, this is our intended experience. We really recommend you play it like this. But if you really can't, just go wild. You can control basically every variable from the speed your thirst goes down to the amount of damage you do, the amount of damage you take. And it gives you a tooltip whenever you go over each of the bars about how much they think it will affect the balance. So I think that if you change the rate at which your thirst goes up, that will allow you to sprint a lot more. And they say, this will affect the game a lot because the amount of time you have in a day is a big deal. And, they even do it in character. We wouldn't want the actor to run off the edge of the stage or something. But,
yeah. Yeah. So let's talk about what makes this game difficult, and then kind of maybe revisit why I think that the intended difficulty is actually the best way to play this. I mean, the best way to play this is the way that allows you to play it. But with that being said, I do think that the optimal experience, the one that's going to make what the story is doing hit the hardest, is the one where you are desperate and it does feel unbearable from time to time. So the way that happens is you are managing survival meters: hunger, exhaustion, thirst, and immunity. And thirst and stamina are on the same bar. So when you run, your stamina depletes, and then as your stamina bar recharges, the thirst bar starts to rise. And the bigger the thirst bar gets, the less maximum stamina you have. So, I mean, it does make sense. You can't just run around town forever and not get thirsty in a game with this kind of a mechanic. But the way that this gets difficult is that resources in this game are scarce to begin with. And then as the game goes, it turns the screws on you in so many ways. So first, let's just talk about kind of how these kind of work basically, and resources around town and the limitations placed on you. I think the main resource, the one that I had the hardest time managing, was hunger. Artemy is so fucking hungry. You can't. I'm thinking about myself in real life, and like, look, I love to eat. I'm a hungry boy, but I can go 2 hours without eating, no problem. Artemy, on the other hand, he can't. He is it almost makes me wonder if he has a tapeworm or something like that, because my man is just constantly fucking starving.
Yeah, they do try to lampshade it in the story by talking about how, the herbs are in bloom and it fills the air with these, these drugs that strain on your body. And, he's in a very stressful situation.
Yeah.
So they do try to lampshade it, but ultimately, yeah, it is a game balance thing. They want you to be needing to eat all the time.
Mm-hmm. So you have to manage your hunger, you have to manage your thirst and your stamina. And I said that like running makes you thirsty, but you do want to run because one of the most precious resources in the game is time. And you mentioned early in the episode that this game runs on a day and night cycle. All 24 hours are available to you. You do have to sleep because you do have that exhaustion meter building. So you have to choose how you spend your time. And the fun thing about sleeping is you will get hungry when you sleep too. So you always wake up hungry. You might wake up a little bit thirsty. And again, like food is the limiting resource for me. Food and like, I guess money in a way, but it's really just like whatever I can do to get food. Money is limited. Inventory space is limited. You can barter, and that's going to be a good way to get certain things out of your inventory that like shops won't buy, but little kids want to trade for buttons and beetles and razor blades and, all kinds of things that kids like in real life. The kids in this game they'll trade their drugs, their morphine for your sharps. So I really like this game's economy. I think it's really ultimately very well balanced to give you times when you feel like you have a lot, but you actually don't have a lot and it will be gone shortly unless you know exactly what you're doing. Like Repeat, I watched you stream a little bit and it seemed like you had things pretty well under control. But when I was playing, there were a couple times throughout the story when I felt I have a lot of stuff. I'm feeling really good. And then like 12 hours passed and I was like, fuck, I'm out of stuff. I got to go dumpster diving and might have to break into some houses to get some more stuff.
Yeah, I do want to camp out on the economy a bit because I do think in a lot of ways it is the heart of what makes this work so well.
Yeah.
So like you've got the shops, which obviously work for money, at least for most of the game.
Yep.
So you can buy food, and you can buy protective clothing. You can buy, what else? Drugs, like morphine and antibiotics and stuff. And, just from the get-go, this economy is much more dynamic than in other games. Prices will change day to day as the situation develops. Prices on day 2 will be much higher than day 1 because people are starting to panic about food shortages and about this epidemic. Alongside the shopping, the economy for money is the bartering economy, where every class of NPC in the town has items that they want and items that they will trade with you in exchange for stuff they want. And this is different for every class of NPC in the town. And again, it changes as the game goes on. So you can never get comfortable in, specific ways of making a profit. And so a lot of mastery of this game is learning which NPCs want which resources, learning how to get those resources. And often it's about chains where you're like, okay, I really want the item held by, these adult women, but they want practical stuff like, antibiotics, soap, which is a slightly less useful resource. I know I can get soap for cheap from the kids, because they'll give stuff away for needles and nuts because they're idiots.
Yeah.
And so it's about, taking the crap that you find in bins all around the town and figuring out how to turn it into useful items through these various different channels. And it's complex to learn, but I think really rewarding. And it is something that you can learn, like Dave said, I seem to be a bit more on top of the economy because, I'm replaying the game. I know how to get stuff. And so you can get ahead of the resource curve in some ways by doing that. But, the process of learning that is it's fun. That's not a word that gets used for this game a lot, but I think it really is quite engaging to learn all this stuff and manage your inventory and all that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I was not on top of these complex chains of bartering to get this end product that I really want, but I did pick up a few tricks along the way, such as I go dumpster diving, I find this thing, I know who wants that thing. Or I would be ecstatic if I found a beetle because I know the kids really like the beetles, and I can trade that for some morphine or some food or something actually useful to me. And learning kind of along the lines of what you said, learning who wants what, or more specifically, if I'm in an emergency, what do I have in my inventory that I maybe can turn into some food or maybe can turn into a bandage or something like that? That kind of stuff, because I did find myself in these desperate emergencies often. So there's a mastery that you can get into for sure, but I think a lot of people's first experience with Pathologic 2 is going to be just constantly being on the edge of disaster.
Oh yeah.
If I don't play efficiently for 2 hours of game time, I'm fucked. You're going to be in those situations constantly. And my character's literally starving to death and I don't have anything I can trade. So I need to break into a house. There's a reputation system in the game. So there's a consequence to breaking into people's houses and stuff. People are going to start attacking you in the street, or they're not going to trade with you anymore if you tank your reputation. But that doesn't matter because I'm not going to make it to I'm not going to make it to tomorrow if I don't break into this house and see if they have any food squirreled away in their cabinets. You'll get into those desperate situations. And the reason why I think the hard difficulty is essential for this situation is because I think that the fact that you're playing as a doctor is no coincidence. I think that you are put in a situation in this game where you want to heal the world and you want to be a good person, but surviving by yourself is so hard that you're just not going to be able to the first time you play this. You're going to be in these situations where you have all the good intentions in the world and you have this hospital set up where you have these people to take care of, but I can't take care of them if I'm dead. So I need to make these selfish decisions, and the clash between those two things I think is really, really interesting and really well executed in this game. It reminds me of another game that doesn't do this as well, which is Vampire, which I think is a really fun game. I like that game a lot, but the premise of playing a doctor in an infected city I don't think works in that game. In Pathologic 2, it's really, really good. And so you have ways to make medicine, you have ways to heal people, but those take resources and time. And the time you spend doing that is time that you're not foraging for your own resources. And you're constantly put in these situations where you need to make life or death decisions. It might be your life, it might be somebody else's, but you have to make a decision and you have to make it quickly and you have to go execute on that quickly. Otherwise, you can find yourself in unwinnable situations. So without the difficulty that's pushing you into those tough decisions, I think a lot of the emergent stories and a lot of the themes of the game just don't quite work. So I'll never tell someone that they shouldn't play this at all if they can't play it on the intended difficulty. But I will say that everyone should try it on the intended difficulty and bump it down if you're just like not able to make progress. But I think a lot of people kind of underestimate how well you can do. I don't play survival games, and I was able to finish this. Like, this is not, it's not like I played all the Subnauticas in the world before playing this. I actually don't like this genre that much, but I was able to get through this. You just have to prioritize.
Yeah, I completely agree. I also am not very into survival games. This is really the only one that I'm interested in.
Yeah.
In part because it's so different. It's about navigating this economy as opposed to like punching trees to make firewood or whatever. But to sort of give an even stronger recommendation for the high difficulty level. Yeah, I'm sorry to do this. I'm going to bring up Dark Souls.
Okay, let's do it. Somebody had to.
Yeah, we're talking about a difficult game, so, we had to start a timer till Dark Souls.
Yeah.
So in Dark Souls, it's sort of commonly agreed that, obviously that comes up in difficulty discussions a lot. It doesn't have difficulty options, it just has the one. But, a lot of people say that it doesn't actually matter because it has these diegetic difficulty levels instead, like about if you summon or your type of build or using different items that can make the game easier. And so it's a way for you to modulate difficulty yourself without, an easy, medium, hard. I think Pathologic 2 does something similar in that even played on, the base difficulty level, it accommodates various different skill levels in that, like we said at the beginning, the only actual victory condition is surviving 12 days. And if you're dedicating all of your time to just survival, to scrounging resources, to navigating the economy, I don't think survival is actually that hard. Assuming that you're not bothered about progressing anything else, you'll get into tough situations for sure, but I think you can probably eke your way through. And then, then it becomes about managing priorities. So maybe you've got enough to survive for the next, 12 hours. You decide, okay, I'm going to forget scrounging for a bit. I'm going to focus on doing these quests that I want to do.
Yeah.
And then on a level beyond that, it might be that you're doing all right with quests and you're doing all right with personal survival, but maybe suddenly the game's like, okay, well, we're also going to make you responsible for the health of 20 other NPCs that you need to monitor. And suddenly that's like, if you choose to take on that responsibility, then you have to, that's another push on your resources. And so no matter how well or how badly you're doing, the game will put a strain on you.
Yeah.
And so that's, I think that's an underrated aspect of it. People talk about the difficulty, but I think it is open to being played in different ways. And just reaching credits isn't actually as onerous as it might sound at first.
Yeah. So there's a couple things that play into that. The way this game handles death is really interesting, where like dying isn't necessarily like a really bad thing. Like you get a punishment, and there's this really just kind of brutal mechanic here where if you die, your punishments for death, like for example, they might lower your maximum health permanently, and that is burned into this playthrough and all saves associated with this playthrough. So if you reload a save from 5 hours ago, you'll still have that penalty. So that's kind of brutal. But I know people who finish the game with dying the maximum, like getting the maximum number of penalties, and you can still finish the game. It's just making it to the finish line. And there's also like a risk reward to how you play. So there are really lucrative things that you can do around town, but you have to put yourself in harm's way to do them. One example being in infected districts. Being in an infected district will lower a meter called immunity. And if the meter gets to the bottom and then stays there long enough, you'll get infected by the plague. But in the infected district, there are babies that you can go rescue from inside of houses. And if you go rescue a baby, you get a cool reward. You get a nice reward for doing that. But in order to do that, you have to go into infected districts and inside of infected houses. And it's dangerous to do that. But if you're desperate, or if you're good, or both, you can go pursue that and try and, get a nice windfall. Same with trying to take care of patients in the hospital. It takes a bunch of time and resources. It's not necessarily difficult, but it takes time and resources. But the reward for doing that is quite good. So you do have ways to make the game easier or possibly more like rewarding for yourself, depending on what you choose to do. But I like something you said earlier, and it's something I was going to bring up next. Every time that you feel like you're in a good spot, the game will turn the screws on you. And these are really smart and really diabolical ways that this game does this. It's almost like every time I felt like I had found an inefficiency in the economy that I was exploiting, the game was like, we knew you were doing that. Now it's gone. Good luck. So the example I'll give here is at the beginning of the game, you can get fresh water everywhere, basically unlimited fresh water. So you have a thirst mechanic, but water's everywhere. Why do I care about thirst? You can go drink out of the taps if you want to. Later in the game, water will become very scarce. So this thing that you probably felt like, I don't really need to stockpile water, water's everywhere. We're next to a river, for crying out loud. Water's everywhere. Later in the game, you're going to wish you had a stockpile of water. And this, even if someone listens to this and is like, Dave said stockpile water and then I win easily, it's not going to work like that either. But it's just one thing where I found myself like counting on like a really available resource. And then the game is like, guess what? That shit's gone now. Good luck. You want to fix a water pump? You got to find these parts. They're not super common. You want to fix this water pump? Next time the plague rolls through, that pump's going to break again. You got to find those parts again. Now the water's dirty too. Fuck you. That's kind of how I felt like playing this game, is the developers like, almost like there's an invisible man inside my game flipping switches and just cackling, being like, fuck this guy. Let's see how he deals with this. So that's what plays into like putting you in these desperate situations too. And you mentioned another one with how money works in the game, changes throughout the game too, stuff like that.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to the water situation.
Yeah.
This run, obviously I knew it was coming and so I could prepare for it more. But my first time, like, I was so pressed for water because like another system that we haven't necessarily mentioned yet is you can craft your own medicine. Yeah, that requires water. And so it's like you need to drink water, but you also need it to make the base of this medicine. And you can also trade water away to people for healing items. And so it's like, suddenly you're like, I don't have enough water.
Another aspect of this that might make it tough is how combat works. So let's just touch on this. It wasn't a major part of my playthrough, so I won't talk about it a ton here. But this is a first-person game. So it is a first-person combat system, first-person shooter if you find yourself a gun. Although, speaking of desperation, there was one point in the game where I got a gun and I immediately sold it for food. Like, I did not even consider using it for, shooting people or anything like that. I was so hungry, I ran straight to the store and traded it for food. So that should tell you the type of desperation. Though there is, there are a couple of guns that you can get. You can fight with your fists. You can fight with knives. You can use lockpicks as improvised melee weapons. The combat's really hard to get the hang of. I don't think it's very good. Certainly doesn't feel good to be in a fight. I think they want you to feel like unless you take out the enemy quickly, you're going to get knocked around. And every time that does that, you will either, if they're fist fighting you, it's going to fuck up your stamina and then your thirst. If they have a weapon, you can die very quickly. And like we said, dying is bad. So I tried not to fight. I ran away from all the, muggers in the street. And the game starts with everyone hating you. Like people will just like run up to you on the street and start fighting you. And there's like this voice line, the "get over here," that you'll hear all the time. And so I spent the first couple days in Pathologic just running from everybody trying to fight me in the street. And then later in the game, maybe you're out looting at night, but the houses are full of other looters. And if they see you, they'll attack you. So combat was always like, it was either literally fight or flight. Like more specifically, sneak attack. If they don't see me, sneak up behind them and attack them. But if they see me and pull a knife and run at me, I got to run.
Yeah, I definitely agree that it does not feel good. And it would probably feel out of place if it did feel good.
Yeah. If it was Doom. Yeah.
Yeah, like my general rule of thumb is that I can basically quite confidently win a one-on-one, especially if they're unarmed.
Mm-hmm.
If they're armed or if there's more than one, that's like an immediate, I'm leaving. Because one thing as well is that running away can be quite difficult. If you have the stamina, then you can stay away from them quite easily. But if you don't, then as you're running away, they'll hit you and they'll make you stumble and turn you around and make it really difficult to run away, and it'll get really disorienting.
You're not going anywhere.
Yeah, this is just a side thing, but those voice lines they get on my nerves. They have it feels like they have two voice lines.
Yep, for every mugger in the street, for the hundreds of them that you'll come across throughout the game.
Yeah, and so often you'll end up aggroing three at once, and you'll just hear half a second out of sync. Get over here. Yeah, and it's and that was actually one thing that I quite liked in the Russian voiceover is they're much more expressive. Their voice lines, it's not just some guy muttering into your ear. It's like someone yelling at you, and it would often make me jump once they spotted me. The one thing about it is that it is mostly optional. They clearly don't expect you to do much of it, but there are quests. There are specific moments where you will be confronted with combat, and at that point, good luck. There are ways to do it well. Guns are if you get guns, they can be useful, but there are a couple of things that make them less useful, like ammo. Like anything else, that's a resource you have to find. It's not very common. Another thing is durability, which I ran into for the first time on this playthrough. So I found a shotgun at one point, and I thought, I'll try using this. And it had about half durability, and I probably tried to fire it, 8 times total on this run. And 4 of those times it jammed in the middle of firing at half durability. And if it jams, it's this whole long animation of he has to open it up and see what's wrong with it and then close it back up. Yeah. And then reloading is also you have to do it one bullet at a time, and it's really detailed, and it's just, guns are powerful if you can get them to work, but there's a lot going against them, and you are probably better off just ignoring them like Dave did, and like I did on my first run. Yeah.
And again, not necessarily I think this is going to be a pain, so I'm going to choose to play differently. It's literally I could trade this for a loaf of bread and I can survive for another hour and a half. That was the thought process. So to kind of like bring this all together, we've talked about all the ways that this game is difficult and all the ways that they turn the screws on you and all the, kind of desperate and stressed feelings that I felt while playing this. But I want to reiterate after all of that talk that there were times when I was playing this and I could not put it down. I was so compelled by all the things I wanted to try to take care of around town, or all of the, like, maybe I'm finishing a day in a kind of desperate spot, but I have an idea of something that I can go try. Like, all of those things kept me playing this, despite the fact that I got frustrated. There was one point where I had to reload and like redo about 2 to 3 hours of gameplay, which is something that a lot of people, myself included, like, I hate the idea of doing that. But I came out of that in a much better position than when I started. And of course, I got cocky and it all disappeared in, 3 hours or something. But for all the difficulty and all the ways that this game will stress you out, and all the times when I like unbearable as an adjective and a feeling for playing this, all the times when the developers will make this feel unbearable and unwinnable, I could not stop playing this. And it kind of like consumed my thoughts, and I really didn't want to play other games when I was playing. This is one of those where it's like, I'm usually juggling 3 or 4 games at a time, and everything got shelved until Pathologic was finished. It's one of those games.
Yeah, it is. It's really impressive how it all comes together. I mean, we've been talking about mechanics for ages now, and there's still so much that, hasn't really been touched on. Like, there's a thriving organ market.
Yep.
any dead body you find, you can cut open, and you can sell them, or you can use them to brew medicine. Mm-hmm. And that's one thing that I think is really impressive about this game, that basically any given item you find has at least 2 uses, probably more.
Mm-hmm.
It's just very open to these different ways of playing, and that combined with the non-linearity of the plot, and combined with fact that it's all on this timer, and a lot of your gameplay will be spent, planning routes through the town, going from district to district, trying to, hit up as many objectives as you can, but also hit up as many shops or as many lootable areas as you can. It all comes together so that every moment in this game you are making choices.
Yeah.
It might be the most choice-dense game of anything I've played. Every step is, you go in one direction when you could have gone another. Every item that you trade away, you could have sold, or every bottle of water you drink, you could have turned into medicine, or every person that you treat could be an extra immunity booster for you when you're next going through a plague district. So there's just so many approaches, and all of them, there's a scenario where they could be helpful. It's just, when I said that when I talk about other games with people, this often comes to my mind as an exemplary in a lot of ways. That's what I'm thinking about a lot of the time, where it presents as a survival game, and in some ways is like this role-playing game with this story and options you're following. And, it's like, it's 25 hours, like you said, it's not a short game. And yet, in every moment you're playing, you are making choices and you are actively engaged. You're thinking about, the steps right in front of you, about, oh, there's a bin over there, I should go loot it. Or there's a playground over there, I need to trade with all these children in case they have something useful. To, the larger routes of, I have a quest on this side of town, what's the best way to get to it? Or I only have an hour left of the day, what can I do with that? That's really the thing that sticks with me about Pathologic 2. And the thing that I think more games could really, benefit from is just this constant engagement, and this openness, this, systematic openness that feeds into the story. It's not like there's a divide. It's like you will have quests to do, and that will inform how you approach the survival aspect, or the things that you're struggling with in the survival aspect will change which quests you choose to do. It's all this integrated whole that, like we say, when you're playing it, you are just completely in and you are not aware of what's outside.
Yeah.
You know, it's just a very special experience. And so, yeah, that's why I think it's worth playing on this higher difficulty and why I think it's worth it.
Absolutely, yeah. And that kind of leads us into the last part of the non-spoiler section here. So with all of that being said, and I agree with everything that you said there, what type of person would you recommend play Pathologic to?
I think I'd just recommend it to anyone who's interested in game design and games systems, like for their own sake. You know, there's a lot more to offer here. You know, it's a great story, there's great art and all that. But I think if you're interested in interesting systems and interesting choices, this is one of the best versions of that I've seen.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that even if it doesn't connect with you necessarily, I think it's worth trying out just to see this take on mechanics that isn't very common. Makes a lot of choices that we don't see with the time pressure and the difficulty, and just see what they do with it.
Yeah, 100%. This is an easy recommendation for me to people who want unique games. You know, if you want to play something where there's nothing really quite like it, this is definitely one of those. And part of it is that like commitment to making this really punishing, but like you said, really choice heavy mechanical system. But on top of that, you also have this really interesting presentation with the theater angle to everything. You have this really rich lore and world building. You have memorable characters, and you have a bunch of emergent stories that are going to come from how you chose to spend your time and the things that you did to stay alive and who you were able to help along the way, if anybody. Like, I struggle to think of a lot of other games that have given me a similar experience to Pathologic, especially from like the desperation and the decision making that the game forced me into, and then how those things work with the plot. Like the closest thing that I can think of in that angle is this War of Mine, which limits resources in that way and forces you into tough decisions in that same way. But Pathologic is much more difficult than this War of Mine is. And I think they're going for slightly different things, but that's the closest analog that I've played, is that. So if what we've talked about sounds interesting to you, then difficulty be damned, I think you should try Pathologic 2. And if you find it to just be too much and when I say too much, not too much to have a good time. I mean, if you find it to be literally too much to make progress in the game, then consider messing with those sliders and maybe making it so Artemy's not so damn hungry all the time. But I think the intended experience is one that is going to be quite stressful, and it's to a point. So, you know, we did this episode on the podcast a year or so ago, maybe 2 years ago now, about if video games need to be fun and, you know, the value in experiences that are not fun all the time. And Pathologic 2, I think maybe even you wrote in that episode talking about Pathologic. And this is one of those games that, like, yeah, it's not going to be like a happy, good time, but there's so much that this game has to offer, and so much that we need to dig into in the spoiler section coming up.
Yeah.
So, little housekeeping before we get to spoilers. Jack, is there any place where people can find you around, or any place you want them to check out?
Sure. I mean, I don't have a huge online presence. I have Twitch and a YouTube, which is Piboi31. That's Piboi 31.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't done a huge amount there. It's more just dipping my toe in to see if I enjoy it. I might experiment with video essays or something at some point. I don't know, but right now there's really not a lot there. Otherwise, I just, I hang out in Dave's Discord and a couple of other games-focused places online where you might see me. But otherwise, yeah, that's really my whole online existence.
There we go. It's a blessed existence to not be online everywhere, for sure. And I'll definitely recommend, giving you a follow on Twitch. I watched you stream some Pathologic. So again, if someone wants to see Pathologic played well, that might be one place to go see it. So
yeah, I did save a couple of VODs of that. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, there we go. Yeah. So I'll link those so people can check those out. And if you want to support this podcast, listeners, you can do so by leaving a rating and review. If you've enjoyed this so far, leaving a rating on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, Podcast Addict, likes and comments on YouTube, all those things help people find the show. And so if people are looking for a Pathologic 2 podcast, they might find this one. And that's what we want. So that's a big help. You can join the Discord server that Jack mentioned earlier. There's a lot of wonderful people in there talking about the games they're playing, talking about the podcast, things like that. It's a great community. It's my favorite place to hang out online these days. So there's an invite link for that down in the show notes. And if you want to support monetarily, you can do so at patreon.com/RealDaveJackson, where I do monthly polls for games that I do on the show. There's bonus episodes, a bonus retro gaming series. There is a lot of cool stuff there. So we're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we will do full spoilers for Pathologic 2. All right, before we get to spoilers for Pathologic 2, I want to first of all say thank you to everyone who's joined the Discord server recently to join our Backlog Resolutions Challenge for 2025. If you're listening to this and you'd like to join us and try and knock some games out of the backlog, go ahead and join the Discord server and we'll point you in the right direction. So then all that's left to do is say thank you to the patrons who help support the show. Big shout out to Chris Nelson, the Top 3 Podcast crew, Zulgeek, Chris Copleen, Eric Guess, Rick Firestone, Nick Fakori, Jill, Jeff, formerly Jerf, Kieran, Soccer, Cupcake, Kyle, Christian S., Matt, aka Stormageddon, JD, Doug Leaf, Jason Emery, Brian Skirsha, Randall, Jake Martin, Jenny E., Marcus O'Neill, David Stecco, Stefan, William Prentice, and some new patrons. Welcome in Ginny Beasley, Drellish, Rob Smith, and Ben. Thank you all so much. Your support is greatly appreciated. And with that being said, let's get back to full spoilers for Pathologic 2. All right, we're back, and it's full spoiler time for Pathologic 2. And at the beginning of the spoiler section, a couple of things to be aware of. Number one, this is not a linear walk. We are going to do like a journal style, like on this day, this happened, and this is how I dealt with it type thing, but we are not going to save the end for the end. We might talk about it early on. So if you don't want to be spoiled, just keep that in mind. Spoilers are free flowing in here. And the other thing is, I just want to acknowledge at the top of this, I'm not an expert in the lore, the characters, or all of the themes that this game is dealing with. So there's going to be a lot of things that we're not going to cover. And if you played this game, there might be things that you feel very strongly about that we just don't talk about in here because there is so much. So with that being said, let's kind of get into early days in the game. So the thing that stuck out to me most in the early days is just trying to like come to terms with who people are and what my role in all of this is, because you're kind of just like bouncing around from place to place as things open up in your little, like your mind map. But they send me out to talk to the street urchin kids that live in the warehouses. I don't really know why I'm talking to them, but we're going to talk to them. And then I'm sent to go talk to, the big bosses, the mayor, all these people. And then just coming to terms with like the economy and how things work, at least at the beginning, that was kind of like what dominated my experience, is this feeling of being overwhelmed by proper nouns and things like that. And then also like trying to figure out how to find food reliably.
Yeah, I mean, the opening, this game has a lot of characters. And so a lot of like day 1 and 2 is introducing you to the big concepts and stuff. Yeah, I mean, it was a bit different for me just because I was familiar with Pathologic 1.
Yeah.
So in that sense, a lot of like character names and roughly where people fit into the town was already known. So I didn't quite get the same like completely lost in the town experience. But there's definitely a lot of introductory stuff. You have to learn that your father's died, and then there's all the fallout from that. Yeah, it's quite interesting on day 1 actually, just because because it opens quite rough in a way with everyone suspects you of murdering your father, and so you can see your reputation tank in real time as rumors spread. And so a lot of the quests sort of take place around the edge of the town, so you don't have to get right in there and get beaten up by everyone. But it is merciful in a few ways. Like if you die on day 1, you don't actually die. You like get brought to Grief's warehouse.
Yeah, because people don't. I think it's because people don't have weapons, right? They just beat you up till you pass out.
I'm not sure, but I think it was mostly just a gameplay mercy. But yeah,
a small mercy.
Yeah, the main thing on day 1, I guess, is introducing you to your 3 like childhood friends in the town, which is a new thing in Pathologic 2. In Pathologic 1, Artemy, he didn't have friends. He was a bit of a weirdo. Yeah, and sort of establishing your connection. So I guess that can be built up over the rest of the time.
Yeah. One thing I do remember from day 1 is a kind of like fuck around and find out decision that I made, which are not good decisions a lot of times in this game. But buying the bull from the guy on the street,
yes,
not cheap, and I didn't have a lot of money for the early portions of the game. But I thought, hey, this guy's selling a bull. I will buy it and see what happens. And the result is, I'm not really sure what the point of buying the bull is, except like obviously there's the connection with the bull's religious significance with the steppe culture, but I don't know what happens if I bought that particular bull. I don't know the ramifications of that.
There aren't really huge ramifications. It's just you get to buy a bull.
Yeah, and it,
you always buy the bull. You shouldn't ignore the bull. It's funny because the guy's selling it because it's meant to talk on the worst day of your life. And so he's like, well, if I get rid of it, I won't know, or there won't be a bad day. But the bull actually does talk to you on day 11. Did you get that? Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I talked to... Oh, wait. Yes. Okay, so on day 11, I did. But for a lot of the game, you go talk to the bull, and it just kind of stares back at you. And so you're
you just talk to it like a bull. But yeah, then on the last day, it does speak to you in the steppe language, and Artemy's like, oh, okay, things are serious.
Yeah. So that was one early thing that I remembered. And then the other, what day does the plague hit? Is it day 3?
Yeah, it's day 3.
Yeah. So the introduction of that, when the alarm bell rings, the stagehand characters are standing in these poses, pointing you through the streets. This song is playing. That was a moment for sure. Like this game doesn't have a lot of set pieces, we'll say. Like there's the stuff at the beginning is really striking when you're going through the streets, and then when you get off the train in these kind of like dream sequence type things, when you go out and you talk to the plague doctor characters and the giant bull is out there.
Yeah.
But other than that, like in the, day 1 to 11, there's not a lot of set pieces really. And this one, when the plague starts, was super striking. I really liked it.
Yeah, there's, these stagehands pointing you to the town hall while this bell tolls.
Yeah.
And the streets are lined with coffins. And somebody puts up all these posters of the stagehands like peeking through windows and stuff, which I really like.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a great moment. Just before we get into the time where the plague actually hits, post day 3, I think it's interesting how the first few days have, it takes a while for the plague to hit. And, I saw an interview where the developers were like, oh, we did this so you could see the town, at peace before this thing hit so you can appreciate the scale. And I think it does that to some extent. But also from the moment you get there, the town is kind of in disaster mode. Like, the first day you arrive, they are executing women in the streets because
they think there's a steppe monster going around killing people.
Yeah, there's your father's died and another important person, Simon Kane. They're these two big like founders of the town have died, and they're like, well, no one could have killed these people except some demon.
Yeah.
And it's actually I actually find this like a really interesting narrative thing in that, it's a sign of how interwoven the steppe people and their beliefs are into the town, because it's this steppe story of this Shabnak Adig, who's like this creature who just emerges from the earth in times of crisis.
It's said to predate the plague, the sand pest, right?
Yeah, it's just meant to be this folk thing that like when the earth is like in pain or something, it disgorges this thing that enacts its will or something. But I find it interesting because that's this very, traditional steppe folklore, but the whole town believes it, including this Western modern part. And it's specifically, they are using this myth to target steppe women. The only women being attacked are from the steppe, these herb brides, or they have, there's a visual difference between the white, European members of the town and the like native steppe people.
Yeah.
And they are the only ones being killed. It's like this, this horrible cultural appropriation where they've taken their folklore and then are using it to justify their violence against them. It's and that's actually a change from 1. In Pathologic 1, it's just all the women are being suspected, but in 2, there's this renewed focus specifically on the colonial aspects, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah, and you get kind of like put in the middle of that in several ways, with especially late in the game, with who you kind of spend time doing quests with in a kind of way, but ultimately it's more like whose belief system do you align with when you make your final decision in the game. So maybe that does start like really early in the game when they're trying to clearly maybe put these two cultures have integrated to some very small degree, but trying to put them a little bit at odds with each other. And you have you get introduced to the big factory where, a bunch of steppe people, I was never quite clear, like, are they choosing to be there? Are they slaves in that factory?
I think they're pretty much slaves. Like, I think the idea is that they're employed by Olgimpsky, and that's the only work in the that's the only work in the town for them. So they really have no other option. Yeah,
you could just like starve out in the desert with no money or whatever, but here's a way that you can work. And it's, it's fucked up in an ironic way that their work is slaughtering bulls, which are their, one of the big religious symbols in the steppe culture.
Yeah. And it's interesting because those slaughterhouses are built on what was this ancient temple of theirs.
Yeah.
So it's like this extra desecration. Like they did used to slaughter bulls there, but as part of like ritual sacrifices.
Yeah.
And here it's like been turned into this, industrial process.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the game does a lot with that and about the idea of progress, which I'm sure we'll get into more.
Oh yeah. We'll talk about, we'll talk about progress, capital P progress later for sure. So did you ever get infected since like the plague is just being introduced here?
Um, I've never been infected for very long,
Okay.
either because I've loaded a save or because I've cured it fairly soon afterwards.
Okay.
I think I had the plague for about a day in my current playthrough. I just was clumsy and like walked into a plague cloud,
Yeah.
which is often how it will happen. It's very undignified.
I think it happened to me trying to treat a patient in the hospital. And sometimes when you treat those patients, the plague clouds will just come out of them. And
Yeah.
I think that's how that's how I got it super lowered. And then I got infected by trying to get a baby out of a house.
Yes. I think I saw that on stream. Yeah.
Yeah. That was brutal. Yeah. So getting infected is no joke. And that's why I had to reload that save that I mentioned earlier from, 2-3 hours, couple of like in-game days before I found myself in that unwinnable situation. But getting infected can kind of lead us into talking about the plague a little bit. I think that everyone should get infected, probably will, but like should, just for the experience of having the plague talk to you. And you will get a little window into like the nature of the plague before the story spells out what it is. So the plague in this game it's not like a pathogen like, a real world plague. It's a kind of a living thing. It comes from the earth. Again, like you said, when the earth is in pain. And I didn't expect this. And then when I found out, got the clue, oh, it's talking to me, and, conventional medicine doesn't really work. It doesn't cure it, at least. There's only 2 ways to cure it, and both of them are kind of weird. It's just an interesting way to kind of set up like what this plague actually is. It has a much deeper story significance than just a virus.
Yeah, it's a lot more than the thing to set off this crisis. It is what it is, and why it appeared is very important.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like really interesting when you first get infected and it talks to you, and the things it's saying are like, it's talking about, I don't know, I can't remember specific lines now, but it's talking about like connections between people, and that it's something to be withstood, not feared, and it's a lot, I guess, to make you question what it is and what its actual role here is.
Yeah. So speaking of its role, one of the like thematic things that this brings up is eventually you learn that the kin, the people from the steppe, are not susceptible to the plague. They're fine. It's only the settlers, we'll say, the colonists, or the descendants of the colonists or whatever. They are the ones who are being affected by it, including you. You can be affected by this. And the reason given in the game why the kin are not susceptible to it is because they've given up the concept of I. So they have almost given up the concept of self, and they have this collectivist group that they live in. And this is why the sand pest doesn't affect them. So it sets up this idea of individualism versus collectivism. And this is why I think one of the reasons why I think Artemy is the perfect character to be in this situation, because eventually you have a choice a little bit of, do I believe the ideology of the kin, or do I want to follow the ideology of the people in town and progress, basically? But it's not as simple as, so 2 reasons. Number 1, Artemy can go to both. The kin would welcome him back, and the townspeople would welcome him to their way of life. And, they're going to do Pathologic 3 with the Bachelor, and the Bachelor, I don't think, would be welcomed into the kin as readily. I guess we'll see where that goes.
I highly doubt it.
Yeah, exactly. So Artemy is the perfect character for this type of decision because he could reasonably go either way. And the other reason it's interesting, I think, is it's not as simple as like you are given the choice to lose yourself and assimilate versus choose the individualist side, like something like System Shock 2, which was on the podcast not long ago, or there's a couple of endings in there's an ending or two in Citizen Sleeper that are kind of like this as well, where I don't want to say like full spoilers for those other games, but it's kind of a nuanced decision that you're making here, and it all stems from this kind of idea that if you have this individualist, self-focused way of life, the sand pest is targeting you. And if you are part of this more collectivist group that is in tune with the earth, then the sand pest is like literally no harm at all. It does not bother them. And I thought this was really interesting.
Yeah. I mean, there's a few things I think worth...
I brought up a lot of points there.
I'm just trying to think where to start. I have a lot of thoughts about the kin in this game, the local indigenous people. I think they're really interesting. And I think a lot of the time they're very sensitively portrayed, but I mentioned earlier, there are bits that maybe aren't quite as sensitive. I'm very aware that this is a podcast of two white guys talking about colonialism. But I don't know, I guess I'll explain their role in the story first before getting into like interpretations. But
sure.
With the plague specifically, it's like it's not just all of the people who are like descended from this steppe culture are immune. It's specifically people who are still in tune with those beliefs and who have like given up the concept of like the individual, as you said. Most kin aren't like that. So like the ones who are living in the termitary, these giant worker homes for the people who work in the slaughterhouse, they are basically all dead because, as the game puts it, they've been torn from their relationship with the earth. They've been alienated from their own culture by this industrial colonizing force. So that's what's going on with them. There's a lot of stuff where it talks about the kin being a collective, where some of the language is kind of concerning, I guess I want to say, in that the kin are treated as this collective with fewer individuals, and in a sense, they refer to themselves as, or they're called beasts quite often, in the sense of like they aren't human. And there's a few ways you can interpret that. Like, it can be seen as part of this rejection of the category of human as distinct from the rest of nature, which was like something brought by the town and this modern European way of seeing the world. But there's another way you could look at it, where it's almost like playing into these racist basically tropes about colonized people being less civilized and not having a culture themselves. I don't want to take a hard stance on it, because on like what the game actually believes, because partly I'm not entirely sure myself. And partly because, there's different reads on it within the fandom. Like, I've read essays from, people, like biracial people who think that the way it treats Artemis' identity as part from the kin and part of the town as offensive. And I've seen other people say that they felt really represented by it. So, it's difficult to come down on any one side, but I think it's at least worth being aware that it gets into these thorny topics and it's not always clear what it's saying. I'll let you talk for a bit, but I'll just say, I'm sure this will come up as we talk about the endings and stuff as well. It all feeds into each other.
Yeah, for sure. It's always interesting when you have, like you said, thorny topics like this that the game is representing, and thinking about whose point of view you're getting these opinions or descriptions of the kin from. Like the people in town might have those points of view that they are less civilized or something like that. And it's not, to me, a representation of like an ideology of the creators. It's just, you have a town of colonizers and they may feel a certain way about the indigenous people there. And that's a reflection on those characters. And, you know, if somebody was negatively affected by the portrayal of the kin, then I'll never say that they're wrong for feeling that way. But it is interesting that we get those perspectives from the white people in town, where, you know, how many other types of representations, I mean, of Native Americans and things like that have we seen, or at least that I've seen, where that is how they're portrayed. And that was a normalized way to portray them for a really long time. So, yeah, I don't think that this game shies away from having characters have really outdated and racist views about the people who share this town and this land with them. And everybody's kind of like feelings about that portrayal is going to be valid and different, I think. I don't really have an opinion on the portrayal other than, you're right, like a lot of the people in the town definitely feel a certain way about the kin and their beliefs. But it is odd that, like you said at the beginning, they have this myth or this, you know, this folk tale about this monster that comes out of the steppe, and they're all on board with that. So the like, you know, appropriation of seemingly random things happens in real life too.
Yeah. And I think you're right about like the attitudes of the townspeople. I actually think that's one of the most interesting parts of the game. You know, how people in the town talk about the kin and how other characters react to Artemy. There's a really memorable conversation with Lara Ravel, who's one of Artemy's like best childhood friends. And they're really close. But there's a moment where she's like upset about something when you come and talk to her. And then as you're trying to like find out what's wrong or console her, one of the dialogue options has Artemy refer to her as, you know, with a step word, which, you know, that happens all the time in dialogue. You might not think anything of it. And she freaks out. She's like, don't call me that. I'm not one of your step girls. And it's like this really like shocking moment where this, you know, person you're really close to and is really like, she's nice and she's very friendly.
Yeah.
But she has this violent kind of reaction to the step culture. So I think that stuff is really interesting. But I think where people have problems with it is more that the kin themselves sometimes use language like that to describe themselves. Or
I was going to say that. So there is like, there's a divide in the kin. And so, like you said before, they're not all adhering to the old ways, so to speak. And the ones who are have feelings about the ones who aren't, and vice versa.
Yeah. And I don't want to make it sound black and white. Like, I think there are some really interesting things it does with the kin and their attitudes. Like, you get this sort of recurring thing where at night, the kin gather in this character called Aspity's house.
Yeah.
And they just sort of, she's this leading figure in the kin, and they just sort of go to her for advice, basically. And you can talk to them in their place as you're sort of taking your role as like a leading figure in these people. And they have like these very varied viewpoints. Like some of them, you know, Aspidy's been talking to these people about how one day they'll revolt and they'll take over the town themselves and they'll throw off oppression. And some of them are really, you know, looking forward to that and, you know, being able to enact their own culture. And, you know, some of them are like really hesitant and they're like, you know, these people are my neighbors and my friends, you know, would I be allowed to spare them when it happens? So I think it's really interesting, like the different viewpoints that you get. But yeah, like I do think there is something worth talking about with how some of the attitudes are put forward, maybe.
Yeah.
And there's also just like some other small stuff. Well, I say small, other stuff that feeds into their portrayal. Like, you know, Artemy is this framed as this like paternal figure to them. And it's almost like the kin act like they need these parental figures basically to lead them, which, you know, some people have had things to say about it, which isn't great. But in some ways, like the town is also shown as this in need of growing up. You know, there's a common metaphor that comes up in the game about how the town is like an embryo, and it's connected to the outside world by this the train station, like an umbilical cord. And there's a lot of talk about how it needs to grow up, and this plague might be a way of doing that, but that's getting ahead into the plot. we haven't actually talked that much about the plot yet.
Yeah, that ties into Isidor's, plan that you're kind of unpiecing as you're going through, and you're kind of like tasked as the successor to executing this plan that he had to help the town grow up. And there's another part of that, that kind of like theme of growing up when you're making your decision about what to do with the tower, and what to do with the kids, because, there's, for those who didn't play, on one end of the town, there's this big tower. It's called the Polyhedron, and it's this laws of physics defying structure that all the children have gone into. They live there. They don't allow any adults to come inside. They say that it's like a place where dreams come true, and there's like a kind of magic going on in the Polyhedron. And then, so at the end, you're given this choice of, if you're going to help protect it or to help facilitate its destruction. And it's interesting. I think it's on the last day, like when you're about to make your decision, there are a couple of kids out there who beg you to destroy it because it's holding them back. And they say that they're not able to grow up while it's there. They're drawn to it, and it's I don't know, stunting their development or their growth somehow. And so like it's been portrayed this whole time as this like magical, wonderful place where the kids get to go and be kids, and they have this little society or whatever, but it's ultimately holding them back. And once they're out of it, they kind of want you to destroy it. And that was a big surprise to me, to have this be more complicated than, because of course it is, because it's pathologic, but more complicated than it first seemed.
Yeah. I mean, I guess this sort of leads into talking about the ending choice a bit, which we've gotten to it quickly, I guess. But
yeah, it's all right.
Of course, there's a lot to say about it because it's pathologic. But I mean, there's a lot of ways you can read the story and the endings, obviously. But I think what's really central to the ending in particular is this coming of age theme. So the two choices are you destroy the tower and you cure the plague, and then the town becomes this normal, everyday town. There's some weird people in it, but it's fairly standard.
Yeah, and they're gonna expand the town too. I think one of I forget their names, but the people who live in the mansion across from the cathedral talks about they talk about expanding across the river. Yeah.
So that's one option. And then there's the other option where you leave the tower up. And this option was actually quite a surprise because it's very different from anything that's in Pathologic 1. I guess I can talk about why it was surprising to me on my first time. It's because, so the polyhedron, as Dave said, it's this thing on the other side of the town, this miraculous structure. And it's often used as this symbol of progress and like the miracles that humans can achieve. And the progress that we can make. The tower almost floats above the earth. We're so close to transcending the earth that we're standing on.
Yeah, tower reaching up to the heavens, stuff like that.
Yeah. And so for a lot of the game, it's positioned as this thing that Artemi would be against because he's all about the earth and the connection to the earth. And it's this thing that's against the kin, as these people who have a deep connection to the earth. At the end of the game, it's revealed that the polyhedron and the earth are more closely linked than you thought. I mean, I guess this gets into stuff about the abattoir and stuff, but basically the polyhedron has this deep foundation below the town. I guess it's worth saying the town is literally alive.
Yeah. So that's a big thing is if you look at the map early in the game, you'll wonder why are the districts in the town named after, the hindquarters, the atrium, these other parts of a living being. And then eventually when you do the Abattoir quest, your map reveals that it's in the shape of a bull. So that's kind of cool. So the earth is a literal living thing. You talk to its heart at one point.
Yes. And so specifically with the heart, you can see the foundation of the polyhedron has almost pierced it.
Yep.
And so the whole idea is that this was like, this attempt to transcend our nature and our limits has, hurt Earth irreparably. It's in pain. And so it's released the sand pest as this way of driving off humans, basically. It's compared to we are an infection and it is the immune system. And so the ending choice is surprising because to keep the Earth alive and the steppe culture and all that, you actually have to keep the polyhedron around. Because to destroy it would essentially be like pulling out an arrow from, if you've been shot or something, and then you bleed out. And so if you want to preserve this old way of life, you have to keep this symbol of the future around, which confused me a lot at first until I started thinking of the story in terms of this coming of age thing, where it made a lot more sense because the polyhedron and the miracles of the steppe, like these wondrous, huge bulls, like the size of the town, and these miraculous creatures, like I don't know if they're called albinos or something, with there's like these weird long necks, and there are these bizarre creatures of the steppe which are miracles. They're miraculous, and the steppe people are able to perform miracles, and the polyhedron is also a miracle in a sense of this man-made miracle. And so the ending choice is about, do you destroy these dream-like things, these miracles, and leave a mundane adult town that will progress into the future and will be like any other town? Or do you keep the wonders around and live in this dream-like fantasy with this impossible tower and these impossible creatures, but sacrifice the human town in exchange? So that's that's the whole coming of age read that I think I have.
So in your read, what decision do you think Artemy would make? It sounds like he would keep the tower up, but what do you think the rationale for that is?
Well, I think the point is that he could make either choice. This goes back to the plot around Isidore, but so your Artemy's father, Isidore, you learn right at the end of the game that actually he deliberately brought the plague to the town.
Right.
As part of this plan to essentially tear it down. He had this idea that the town had grown wrong, as he put it. And, in a sense, you can see why, like the kin are this oppressed people, and, he's this leader of the kin, and he's seeing them suffer, and he's seeing that them and their way of viewing the world and the modern way of viewing the world and the miracle of the tower are all these different ideas that just don't fit together. And so his idea was to bring in this plague to tear the town to pieces. And then the idea is that you come back as his son and make the choice for him for what the town should be. They compare it to breaking a bone that's grown wrong to set it right. And, the game, like a common refrain in this game and the first game is like, any choice is right as long as it is willed. Like, you can make any choice and it is a victory. It's just what aspect you want to preserve, I guess. So I don't know. Yeah, you said you picked the nocturnal ending, the one with the steppe and all that. What was your rationale for that?
So I was reading this from more of that like environmentalist humans and their relationship to the earth, time to right a wrong type of read. That was the kind of thing that I thought that Artemy would arrive at, where progress as we define it in modern civilization, building out bigger and wider and things like that is not necessarily the way, not the healthiest way, especially because in this game's world, the earth is literally a living, bleeding thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought that once the knowledge came out, or at least the way it's presented, that knocking down the tower, kind of with the analogy you used, pulling out the arrow and letting it bleed out, despite, people's rationale for wanting to knock the tower down. And that's the cure for the sand pest, is like the way it's presented is if you knock the tower down, the blood that comes out of this living wound in the earth is the cure for the sand pest.
Mm-hmm.
So you're making the choice, like kind of like you said, of do I preserve the earth or do I try to help the people in town? And I felt like with all of that knowledge that the earth angle would be stronger, but it was less of a I'm choosing the future of this place and more of a, what happens if the earth dies type of situation, which I never got a clear answer on, because if you knock the tower down, because I did that ending just to see it, if you knock the tower down, it's not presented as if there's going to be an apocalypse or that the earth dies or something like that. So I was a bit confused, but before I had that knowledge, that felt like the choice of sacrificing progress to continue life in general. It's kind of like, anything that makes a commentary on making sacrifices to slow climate change or something like that. Like progress can stop or slow if we can continue to exist. And that should be the obvious choice. And that was kind of the way that I read the choice. It felt very obvious to me, but for very different reasons from the way you described it, which is cool.
Yeah, it's a cool rationale. And there's definitely stuff in there about progress, like the whole thing is that the earth has been wounded by mankind pursuing progress.
Yeah, and where have we heard that before, right?
Yeah. So yeah, I guess I don't really have a preferred ending. Like, I guess there's a lot that's been written about this ending. There's some people that see it as kind of not fitting with the rest of the game, in the sense that you're forced to choose between these two things, the town or the kin in the earth.
Yeah, it is really the only thing that you're forced to do, really, right? Because you get to day 11 and you could have done nothing but gather food and sleep to get to day 11, and then inaction is a choice here. So you either deliver the papers or you don't deliver the papers, and then you get the ending based on that.
Yeah. Yeah, and so a lot of people think that choice is kind of, it comes out of nowhere, because the whole game talks about Artemi as this weaver of the lines. He's the one who's meant to sew the town back together, and he's part kin and part town. And so I've seen a few people argue that it's disappointing he couldn't find a way to preserve both. And, some people have gone so far as to say that that's like being forced to make that choice again is like almost offensive. I'm not going to go that far, but I would say that I guess it's upsetting that the game can't imagine a way for this traditional culture and this relationship to the earth to be preserved alongside a modern town. It's one or the other. But, I guess that's the tragedy of it.
Yeah.
That something's always lost.
I think that's the fact that something is always lost is in complete alignment with everything leading up to that point from your player perspective, because every choice that you've made along the way to stay alive for 11 days has had a cost somewhere else. And I don't think it's ever as strong as it is in your first playthrough, where, the things that I had to do to make it to day 11 in Pathologic were at the extreme cost of like almost every other quest line. Like I wasn't able to find the killer of Isidore. I wasn't able to save very many people around. Anyone who survived the sand pest basically did it through sheer dice rolls. There were very little people who survived due to my intervention, except for the people that I gave the living blood to at the end. And I saved one for myself too, because I had to. I think by the end I had the 4 or 5-ish vials of the living blood, and then I had 2 schmouters that I found through my entire playthrough. So that's not many people who I was able to intervene and save. And all the people who I did were infected. It wasn't like a preventative thing.
Yeah.
So the point being, the fact that every decision that I made as a player along the way had a cost for the people in town, or a personal cost of, something I could have been doing instead of looting houses and killing bandits or whatever I was doing on, day 8, 9, and 10. I think it would be too clean if this game had an ending where everything was solved and both were satisfied. This doesn't seem like a kind of game to me where that type of ending should be possible based on everything that happened before.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a fair way to look at it. Yeah, and even keeping with the colonialist lens that I've been looking at it through, it does make sense. At this point, the town's been founded. There's no undoing what's been done. You just have to decide what's to be done about it now. I sort of realized that we've gone straight to the ending and sort of missed out everything in the middle.
It's okay. We follow the flow of conversation. So with that colonialist lens, then both of these endings are kind of saying that this is fundamentally unfixable and will never be 100% compatible, these two things. The fact that you have to choose whether you agree with, maybe not in such a simple way of saying it, but that you agree with the townspeople's way of life or the kin's way of life or something like that.
Which do you think is worth preserving, I guess?
Right. Yeah. Or which thing that these two cultures place importance on, do you place the most importance on at the end? Even if one of the choices is literally, we get the panacea for the sand pest, and then the people who have progress in mind are allowed to survive, so their ideology survives. I think that one of the things that the game is definitely saying by not giving you the option to save everybody in a way is that all of this is not 100% compatible, and something does have to give.
Yeah, and it's quite, I guess, a pessimistic view in that way.
Pessimistic, realistic. I mean, who's depending on what lens you're viewing this through. If you're viewing this from the environmentalist lens that I was looking at this ending through, it is realistic to say that progress and the health of the planet are kind of incompatible for the time being. Yeah,
or at least progress as it's defined by these industrialists.
Exactly. Yeah, for sure. So. Yeah, that was a lot of me talking there.
No, I did a lot as well. I think that's a good look at the endings.
This is it's an ending where you can read a lot of other philosophy and stuff through the choices that you make at the end as well. And that's we haven't even talked about Mark Immortel's pursuit of learning about death and all of that stuff, which frankly I didn't really understand, so that's not why I didn't bring those up. But there is this entire angle there.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't even see much of that this playthrough because, not to put on my gamer cred, but I didn't die very much, so I didn't talk to Mark.
There we go. I like how when you die, just on that subject there, he's just like just so disappointed in the actors for not doing well enough. And he's just kind of like, well, I guess you just weren't fit for the part, and hopefully the next person is, go on, get out of here, you piece of shit. You're fired.
Yeah. And I like especially how, the debuffs that you get every time you die. The idea is that, well, they're going down the list of actors and each one is slightly worse than the next.
Yeah. Speaking of, there's a debuff that I got where I was not allowed to hug anybody. Where does that come into play?
Yeah, so my main goal for this current playthrough was I wanted to be able to hug people.
Okay.
So you get that debuff on the second time you die.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of just played as a joke, like, for this one, I'll be gentle with you. I'll just take away your ability to hug. And it doesn't come up much in the game, but there are a couple of times. I'm trying to remember if there's anyone you can hug except Lara. I think she's the main one, but there are times where she needs comforting. Specifically, I remember after she tries to assassinate the general. Yeah, this whole other plot we haven't talked about. She tries to assassinate the general because she's angry about her father being killed by the army. And she's like really stressed, and you can be like, hey, you need a hug. And if you have the debuff, you'll go to hug her and she'll be like, what's wrong? Why aren't you doing it? And you'll just have to be like, I can't lift my arms. And then everybody's very sad. But I was able to give her a hug and she felt better and I felt better.
Well, there we go. There are very few moments of victory in Pathologic 2. So they give you one right there.
Yeah. Well, one thing I actually think is that this game has a lot of heart, pun not intended. I think that's one of the big changes from the first game is that was a very cold game. It was very well written with very realized characters, but a lot of them you just don't care about because they're so distant and abstract and you just hate everything.
Mm-hmm.
And in this game, you really do form attachments, I guess the core people in Artemy's life are his three childhood friends, Lara, Ravel, Dark Reuben, and Bad Grief. And over the course of the game, you can repair or reconnect your relationship with them. And that's really, I found those some really touching moments. And that's one side of it. And then the other side is that you're responsible for all the town's children, or the most important children. You sort of take them all under your wing. And I gotta say, these kids are great. I love them all. And specifically, there are two, Murky and Sticky, who you explicitly adopt by the end of the game. They are my children. I would die for these children.
Sticky is really funny. So I love Sticky too, but he's especially you're on really uneasy grounds with him for a while, and I feel like maybe in the mid-game area, Sticky's always rolling in with some weird scheme or something that he got into during the day, and he comes back and tells you about it. Maybe it's a situation that you need to fix because of something he did, and you're like, I felt like every time I was talking to him, I'd be like, God damn it, Sticky, what is it this time?
Yeah, there is a lot of, the town has an underworld. Specifically, there are two gangs of children who are at war with each other. And Sticky's kind of odd in that he doesn't fall into either one, but he's still a bit of an outlaw. And so he just knows people and will get into schemes. There's a great quest where you have to get a toolkit to repair your brewing equipment. And he's like, oh, I know a guy, he owes me something. And you're like, oh, great. So you go over to the shop and he's like, okay, so you distract him and I'm going to rob him. And you're like, I thought he owed you. And he's like, he does, but he won't give it to me. And then you have to do this quest where you have to keep this guy talking long enough. And if you keep him talking longer, Sticky can rob more and better stuff and, stuff like that. Bonding opportunities with your adopted son.
It was great. Yeah. All right. Let's talk a little bit about some of these key turning points in the quest to stay alive, we'll say.
Mm-hmm.
So the first one, I think, because we talked about how the plague begins, I think the first big one is on day 7, the Inquisitors are sent to town to kind of contain this situation. And this is like a big fucking deal that this Inquisitor is coming. They're basically like Judge Dredd or something like that. Like they can have people killed. They just call all the shots in there. So the big thing for this one is this is when your money stops being useful, because all the shopkeepers are told you're supposed to use these coupons now instead of money, and they're told not to accept your money, and you're told not to like bribe the shopkeepers with money. And so there's one shop after this that will accept cash, which is thankfully located close to your base. So a couple days before this, the dead item shop will start to have these candy wrapper coupons for sale instead of all the good shit that he normally has, which really, like, I was really desperate and I was saving up, those broken ampules and bloody bandages and stuff like that for the dead item shop.
Yeah, it's a real commitment to like stock up. You're like, I'm going to this shop, I need all these items. And then you get there and he's like, all right, I'm doing stuff for money this time. And you're like, why did you do that?
Yeah. And all I have for sale is candy wrappers, and they might be useful. They might not. And like we said, this is not a good fuck around and find out game. So your first time playing it, did you buy a bunch of these candy wrappers?
I did not. So this day, I didn't even get to the theater that day because the night before on day 6 is like, that was the most harrowing day of my first playthrough. So I didn't get a chance to visit, and I was completely blindsided by the Inquisitor changing stuff around. And I was on the edge of death for a lot of day 7 because I hadn't stockpiled food either. Like, it was to the point where at midnight I had a sliver of health left, and I was trying to sprint to the town hall where the fund would be for my reward for doing hospital work at the end of the day. Because I was like, all right, I know there will be food there. I need to get there before I starve to death.
Yeah.
I was cutting it really fine. What about you? Did you prepare?
So this is the one time where the foresight of having to load a save from 2 days prior helped. So the first time I bought like 2 of the candy wrappers, and then I got to day 7 when money was useless, but I had the infection and I couldn't progress any further. So I had to reload, and so I knew that was coming. So then I bought more of the candy wrappers, and even with the foresight to do that, the candy wrappers are not worth a whole lot. So even though I bought a bunch of them, it was not a great, overall, not a great, plan. Like, I was able to buy maybe a can of food or something like that. It wasn't like I was swimming in food because I had stocked up on candy wrappers. It was just maybe the same amount of food I could have bought for that money. Except it was just the time leading up to when money became useless was harder,
Yeah, it's probably just enough for 1 or 2 decent food items, which will last you half a day.
Yeah. I swear he's the hungriest fucking guy on the planet.
I'm telling you, it's these herbs. They're just a nuisance.
Yeah. So there was that. So that was an interesting way that they made it harder on you, for sure.
Yeah, it's one of the biggest shakeups the game does on you, where suddenly the economy completely shifts and you have to adapt around it.
Yeah. So there was that one. There was finding out that all the water pumps are broken. That was really rough because I had been using water bottles as once I realized that there are not a finite number of empty bottles in the world, that they kind of respawn every day and you can get them out of the dumpsters and stuff. And usually end up with 20 or 30 of them if you're doing good dumpster diving. I had realized I could fill these up. I can sell them for 50 coins a pop or whatever and make a decent amount of money just kind of filling up water bottles as I go around town. And then at the end of the day, I can buy some food with that. And then it was like, psych, that's gone. So that was tough. Day 7, 8, and 9, I want to say, were like the hardest for me. I think during those days, I probably accomplished like almost no quests at all. It was just survival mode. People were dying and I would just go to their house and loot their house because they're dead. They don't need their stuff anymore. That's how I spent my time. And then at night, I would like go out looting in houses, and I figured out how to sneak attack bandits or looters. So I had never like fought because the combat is rough, as we talked about before, but I didn't know how strong sneak attacks were until I started doing this. And I had forgotten that earlier in the game, someone basically tells you like, go ahead, kill the muggers who nobody will care. No one will think less of you. Go ahead and do it. It's like that. I think you should leave sketch for like, it's okay. They're nothing. Nobody cares about them. So I did that, and it turns out they had a bunch of good stuff. So I was able to survive like a couple of days from the stuff I found from the looters, including one time one of them had a schmauder on them, and that saved me when I got infected during like a second time during my playthrough. So that like realization, and like I watched some YouTube videos of people who are good at Pathologic and people who know the game playing it. And it's a lot of footage of them killing these muggers around. Yeah. So I was playing it kind of like pacifist because I didn't think that I should be engaging with that because of how hard the combat was. But once I realized you can sneak attack them, they'll turn around, but you'll have a time for another attack and they'll go down in like 2 hits. And they carry a bunch of good stuff. So that was how I spent like 3 to 4 days of this game, is just looting and killing those bandits.
That's funny. Yeah, I've never done much bandit hunting in this game. There are times where as you're running around at night, you'll sort of just bump into them.
Yeah.
And if I had one-on-one, or if there was like a fight going on where one would be fighting with like a guard, I would sort of try and sneak in and, get in some hits. But yeah, I never went hunting them too much. Did you take their organs while you were at it?
No, I forgot about the organ stuff. I was so desperate for goods.
That's funny.
I didn't get into the organ trade at all.
Yeah, you can get good money from it, I understand. You can also use it to brew painkillers with healthy organs, which you probably won't need too many of in a normal run, but I've seen in challenge runs, people say that they're really good, especially because they actually have hidden benefits. Like I saw something like making a painkiller with a liver, like makes your exhaustion go recover quicker when you're sleeping, and like restores your I don't know. I've not messed around with it too much, but it's just another system that has surprising amount of depth that is never explained to you.
Yeah, there was another part of my survival strategy in the back third of the game, which is that the economy, the barter economy especially, really tightens up in like day 8, 9, 10 area. You talk to a lot of people and they just don't want anything that's not immediately useful for an epidemic situation. So, and then especially when the kids disappear, there goes your fucking trading partners. So what I did was, I sold every herb that I found to the guy in the bar that will buy them. And that's interesting. Yeah, I would sell those because you could get, especially the more rare ones that you get from pouring blood on the tree roots. Those can get you like, I don't know, 150, 200 coins or something like that. And so I could, because he also had food, so I could buy food there. And then the other thing is he sells the Twyrine or whatever it's called, the hallucinogenic drink, or the one that makes you able to experience what's actually there, not strictly
the one that lets you hear things.
Yeah. But that would lead me to more treasure and more stuff that I could sell or something like that. So I would usually buy one of those and some food. So this is a long way of saying that's why I didn't fix anybody, because I didn't have any medicine, because I had to sell all my herbs for money because I was so desperate for any way to make money once the economy really tightened up.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And it's, a sign of the different strategies this game has for you and the different situations you can create.
Yeah.
I very rarely sold my herbs. I just kept them stashed in my home base, so that whenever I was back there, I could brew the improved immunity boosters so that I could use them on NPCs and for diagnosis and stuff.
Yeah. Whew.
Yeah, it's very different.
I would say I did my last diagnosis, other than giving people the living blood on the last day.
Yeah.
I did my last actual doctor diagnosis, painkiller, antibiotic process on maybe day 7 or something like that. I just couldn't do it after that point.
That's really interesting. So you didn't engage much with the hospital fund then?
I think I got the fund reward maybe 3 times.
Right.
Because some of the quests are easier than others. One of them is autopsy 3 bodies. And I was like, okay, I can do that,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The interesting thing about the fund, we didn't talk about this in mechanics, but it's another really smart system, I think, where you have to do your daily quest in the hospital. And if you do that, you're guaranteed a reward the next day. But you can change the quality of that reward based on extra actions that you do. So you've got a bar at the top of the screen that represents how much you'll get from the fund.
Yeah.
And it goes up when you do things like treat people for the plague. So what I would do is every day I'd inevitably end up running through a plague district anyway, just because quests would take me there. And while I was there, there are just people on the ground suffering from the plague. And I would stop and treat 3 or 4 of them every day. And that would help to max out the fund reward. And, it's difficult to do because it takes, you have to have the antibiotics to treat them and you have to have the tinctures to reveal their symptoms.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're able to do it, I think it is really worth it because you get huge amounts of money and food every day if you get to the highest tier of fund reward. That would always be a priority for me.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's interesting as well hearing that you found the second half of the game the hardest. I actually found the first half the hardest on my first go around.
Ooh, interesting.
I think I didn't stock up at all on day 1 or 2 when things were relatively easy, and so I was constantly scrabbling for every resource I could get. And I was also trying to be completionist, doing every quest I could, which meant I wasn't spending as much time scrounging and trading. So for me, that all sort of came to a head on day 6, where I was behind on the main quest. So the main quest for that part of the story is you're meant to be testing infected organs, brewing antibiotics with them and testing them in your own time to try and find a cure. And I hadn't been doing that. And I was also in a really bad state, survival-wise. And I was like, okay, how am I going to solve this? And so it ended up getting to the point where I, murdered an infected person in the street to cut out their organs so that I could run back to the lair and brew stuff with them. And then I was like, okay, I'm brewing them. But now what am I going to do? I need to test them before the day runs out so I can progress the quest. And there's another quest on the night of day 6 where you are basically forced to contract the plague. So that's the Murky quest where, you remember that?
I don't know.
Oh, so Murky, she is essentially your adopted daughter by the end of the game. She goes out into the steppe. She says she has this imaginary friend.
Oh, yeah.
And you realize as you meet her out in the middle of nowhere that her imaginary friend is in fact the plague. And you have to accept the plague and take it, or she will die. So I did that. And then I was like, hey, I could test out these antibiotics on myself. So I just downed a whole bunch of antibiotics, and that progressed the quest. And then I was able to, progress that quest and find a cure before the Inquisitor arrived. So it was like this really interesting dynamic moment that was made a lot more tense than it already was in the story because of how my survival situation was doing.
That's interesting. Okay. So, first of all, you can find a cure through science? I didn't. By doing that quest, you find a way to cure yourself?
Yeah, so I guess we should say the game is structured in acts, basically. And so your thing for Act 3, which is days 4 to 6, is trying to find a cure. And so there are two ways that can go about. Either you can just fail, in which case one of your friends, Stark, will die on day 7. When the Inquisitor arrives, she'll say that she received this cure from Stark, and you'll find out that he killed himself working to find this thing. So that's the fail. And if the succeed option is you test a bunch of infected organs and realize that none of them are working and the plague can't be fought this way. And then you have a dream. You go to sleep and you have a dream where you are told to go to this abandoned village in the middle of the steppe, which is where the kin used to live before they were all moved in the termitary. And if you go down there, there's this mound of earth which looks like a giant ear, and you can collect blood from there and then make the cure. And that's if you succeed the quest, and it's one of the few times in the game where this triumphant music plays, you've won this victory. And that's the only way to keep your friend stuck alive for the whole game, is if you find the cure that way.
Okay, interesting. So he died in my game, and that quest for Murky, I went out to the place where they said to meet, because I think they said go out there at night or something like that. So I went out there at night and nothing happened. So I just turned around and went back and failed the quest.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's interesting.
So I missed that.
Did Murky survive?
I don't think so. No.
No, that makes sense. Yeah, I think if you don't do that quest, she just is killed by the plague and there's nothing you can do.
Yeah, I think that happened. So we're getting up there on time, but I do want to talk about the abattoir experience too, because that's a situation where my survival, that was like a light shining down from heaven with, everything I needed, basically. So I was doing this thing. I was running out to that village, the abandoned village out in the steppe. I was running out there for a quest, and I just I think I had checked the door to the abattoir earlier in the game and it was locked or something like that. But I heard, the sound of a bull coming from that door. And I just went in there, and suddenly because inside you don't have any meters going on. Everything goes away. So you're just free to be in there, and finding that blood in the fountain, drinking from the first fountain and realizing that it heals everything. It's like magic potion, basically. So is there a way to get through this without killing the little earth people in there?
No. So
yeah.
First of all, I didn't even know you could get in here without the quest beforehand to go do it. So that's interesting.
Oh, yeah. Actually I did have the quest. I had the quest because there's there's a step man in town.
Yeah.
You can go talk to, and he has leads. I think the quest says I need to find someone who's connected to the earth or something like that. So you talk to this, but he said go to the abattoir, and I was I don't know what the fuck that is. So, and it's not marked on your map. So this was a total accident to stumble in there. Otherwise that would have gone completely unsolved.
That was very lucky.
Yes, very lucky. Because this was the way that one of the ways that I felt confident that I'd be able to finish the game, because, we already talked about like what you learn in there by talking to the heart and stuff like that. But this was where I found the cures for people. And then I saved one for myself because I was like, if I ever get into a situation where I can't find food, I'll just drink this and it will refill all my meters. And I'll probably be fine to finish the game. So I finished with one in my inventory that I could have given to somebody else. But yeah, what are you going to do?
Yeah, the abattoir is really interesting. It's probably one of the mechanical low points of the game.
Yeah, because you have to fight, right?
Yeah, you have to fight, and you have to fight without weapons, at least for the first part. You do get like a scalpel for the second half. But yeah, and you have to fight these Adongs, these like earth people who are not really human. They're like these, they look like mounds of clay with these like big eyes. They're very sweet looking, but you do have to kill them, and they
hit
and
really fucking hard too.
They hit hard, and they have a lot of health. So yeah, this is where my one death in my recent playthrough came. I just got backed into a corner by one, and that was it.
Yeah. What's interesting is, so I thought it was a stealth thing. So I snuck past like the first two, and then you go talk to the woman who is supposedly your herb bride. And she had come earlier in the game and said, there's a day that's going to come where you're going to have to kill me. And this is that day. So you do that and you get the knife from her. So I never had to fight any of them barehanded. I got the scalpel from that thing, then went back and killed them because they dropped the bottles. Then you can collect the blood.
Yeah, having the scalpel does make it much easier. I think without the scalpel, it's like 5 or 6 charged attacks to kill them.
The scalpel is, I think it's 1 sneak attack and then 1 regular attack, and they're dead.
Yeah, I think that's how it worked. Yeah. But yeah, you have to kill them to get through because they drop these items. I think they drop bottles, which you can use to collect the blood, which is how you brew the cure. So you need that. But then they also drop these essential items that you need. Because at the end of it, you're like in front of this big pit and there's this ritual table and you're told to connect things on the table.
Yeah.
And you basically do like the brewing mini game, except instead of brewing with herbs and water, you've got like a fingernail and a spindle and something else. And the whole point is like, you're learning how anything can be connected. But I think that means that it is required to kill these guys.
Yeah. So that quest was crazy. Just going through there. I had done almost no combat up until then, except for a few bandit things, and certainly no forced combat until that section. So that was crazy. And then I did want to mention one more windfall that I had found, which is the quest to go out into the steppe and cut the bull that was being sacrificed. And that was just like a random, like, I get a quest from people on the street to go out into the steppe to take part in this ritual sacrifice of this bull. And I just kind of was like, all right, I'll go see what this is about. But then it ended up giving me 2 steaks, which is like an incredible amount of food.
Yeah, that's
like,
huge.
Like half a day's worth of food, if we're being honest. But at that point, going out to the point where this takes place takes forever. And so like it's a big strain on your meters to go all the way out into the steppe and then to go out there and be rewarded with all this food and you get a really good knife out of it and stuff like that was just like, there are little moments of joy when playing this. And that was certainly one of them.
Yeah, that's a very rewarding bit. Like you cut it open, it's just like, oh my gosh, because like the steaks are they're like the most filling food item I think in the game, or definitely up there. And so to get 2 of them is like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, we're in the money. Yeah. Oh man. Well, is there anything else you want to mention before we wrap this up? We're over 3 hours now, and
Yeah, I'm sorry we couldn't keep it lower, but
I feel like we could just do Pathologic story time forever, but is there anything else that stands out to you?
anything? I mean, just to reiterate, we mentioned a couple of anecdotes that we had, but this game is in a lot of ways like an anecdote generator.
Yeah.
The ways the mechanics are, the way the pressure it puts on you, and the context that they're in, with also having the story goals, it puts you in a lot of situations where you're making a lot of tough calls, and like me, just being driven to murder random people on the street for their organs. Like, that's not something I'd usually do. But the game, made it feel like the right option, and I do it again.
And if you want to be good at the game, if you want to be more efficient, you're going to do that stuff. Yeah,
absolutely. But yeah, I think I could talk for much longer, but obviously I think we've hit the high notes.
Yeah. And a reiteration that what you just said about like the tough decisions that the game forces you into. I do think that this game wants you to come away with that takeaway, that in the face of all of this pressure, disaster, things like that even the people with the best intentions will have to make extremely selfish situations to survive. And that's reinforced over and over and over and over again in this game, because you're the protagonist, you're a doctor, you want to help people, but the game is just going to not let you do that in order to keep yourself alive for like long stretches. So I do think that like that's a central thing that this game's attempting, and it's something it's super successful at.
Yeah, and at the same time, it works the other way. When you receive like a gift for free, a piece of charity, or you get a chance to be charitable to someone else and you follow through, it does feel really special and rewarding, even if there's not actually that much benefit to it, because, there is a real cost to it. You've gone out of your way to do something good, or someone else has gone out of their way to do something for you. And that really, it's touching in a way that a lot of games aren't able to really do, because they don't have these same stakes and they can't create that same level of peril.
Yeah, I mentioned This War of Mine earlier, but This War of Mine is a very similar thing where in the midst of such desperation and struggle, the moments of humanity in there shine really brightly when they come in. So people think of This War of Mine and Pathologic as desperation simulators or something like that. But there are these super bright moments of humanity in there too. And when you said earlier that this game has a lot of heart, that's one of the reasons why I agree with that. So, yeah. So that is Pathologic 2, at least to the extent that we're going into it. This is such a dense game, and I think we could probably do another 3 hours just talking about other philosophy, other plot lines, characters, and motivations that we didn't have a chance to touch on in this episode. But for now, I'm happy with the discussion that we've had. So Jack, thanks so much for doing the podcast with me, taking so much time, staying up late, all of that. I really appreciate it.
No, not at all. It was a pleasure. Thank you for having me on the podcast. And, thank you for giving me a chance to get, some of the year's worth of pathologic thoughts that have been brewing in my head out into the open somewhere.
Yeah, I'm sure it's a small dent, but we do what we can. And another plug, if people have listened all the way to the end, you're obviously very interested in Pathologic. So come join us in the Discord server for more conversation this week about Pathologic 2, about the original game. Try to convince me to go back and play that. I'm thinking about it. But and then we're all looking forward to Pathologic 3, which will star The Bachelor, and the developers have said it's going to be very different from Pathologic 2. So I personally can't wait for that.
Yeah, I'm very excited. I have to say it was very funny when they revealed it and it was Pathologic 3.
Yeah, they kind of leaned into like, this game probably shouldn't be called Pathologic 2 for what it actually is, but they're like, you know what, fuck it, Pathologic 3, and then we're going to do the Changeling, and it's going to be Pathologic 4.
Then you get to play as a rat, and it's Pathologic 5.
Exactly. Yeah, we didn't even touch on the rat prophet. That's for another day. So thanks again for joining me. This has been great. And thank you to everyone who's listened to the end. You are my hero, as always. And tune in next week for the next game to come out of the backlog.
Hey, you there! This is Nomad speaking. If you love retro video games and you're itching for some nostalgia, check out the Retro Wildlands podcast. In each episode, I'll use game music and sound to pull you into the gaming experience while I share my own thoughts and maybe a few memories. It's a great way to relive one of your favorite games or learn about a new one. Check out the Retro Wildlands podcast at superpodnetwork.com or wherever you listen to your podcast.
Do you feel like you're the only person in your circle who wants to go deep about video games regularly?
We were like that too, until now.
Welcome to Crossplay Conversations, the brand new bi-weekly topical video game podcast from Luke Lewis,
Joseph Hooper,
And Jacob McCoy.
with many years of breaking it down separately on shows like the Left Behind Game Club, Player Podcast, and Lukewarm Games, the gang is finally coming together to publish their gaming group chat in audio form every other week.
Expect roundtable reviews of the latest games, profiles of upcoming indies, and insightful conversations about essential topics in the video game industry. All with a mostly positive, insightful, and fun style.
Help us out by subscribing on your podcast platform of choice to get the first episodes delivered straight to your feed.
And follow us on Twitter at Crossplay Convos for updates about the show.
Cheers and happy gaming.